Think about the last time a story genuinely surprised you, the kind of mystery that lingers in your thoughts long after you've heard it. Now, imagine that same feeling, but woven into the very fabric of our world's history, embedded in the ancient lands of Asia. This is a continent where time itself seems to hold its breath, where the sands of deserts and the stones of forgotten temples guard secrets that have defied explanation for centuries. Even with all our modern tools and knowledge, there are enigmas so profound that the brightest scholars and most daring explorers are still left scratching their heads. These aren't just gaps in a history book, they are living, breathing puzzles that challenge our understanding of human achievement, spirituality, and the limits of ancient knowledge. The sheer age and depth of Asian civilizations mean that for every answer we uncover, a dozen new questions emerge, pulling us deeper into a past that is both magnificent and mystifying. Today, we are setting out on an adventure to explore 25 of the most perplexing, unsolved historical mysteries from across this vast continent. From the whispers of cities that vanished without a trace to the silent stories of people who disappeared under the most bizarre circumstances, and from technologies that seem to belong to another time to artifacts whose purposes we can only guess at, each mystery is a doorway into the unknown. This journey will take us from the dense jungles of Southeast Asia to the high plateaus of the Himalayas, from the islands of Japan to the sprawling landscapes of the Indian subcontinent. We will walk in the footsteps of kings and commoners, decipher the clues left behind by cultures long gone, and confront questions that have no easy answers. As we begin, remember that these are not just cold cases from a distant past. They are invitations to wonder, to imagine, and to feel the thrill of discovery alongside those who have dedicated their lives to solving them. So settle in, open your mind to the possibilities, and get ready to explore the riddles that continue to captivate and confound us all. Our journey into the unknown begins high in the mighty Himalayas, with perhaps one of the most enduring and beautiful legends of all, the lost city of Shangri-La. The very name conjures images of an isolated, peaceful valley, a secret earthly paradise where people live in harmony, untouched by time and the troubles of the outside world. While the term Shangri-La was popularized in the West by James Hilton's 1933 novel, Lost Horizon, the idea itself is far older, deeply rooted in ancient Tibetan Buddhist beliefs. For centuries, stories have circulated about a hidden kingdom called Shambhala, a pure land said to be concealed somewhere amidst the world's highest peaks, a place where the wisdom of ages is preserved. This mythical concept of a hidden utopia captured the global imagination, transforming from a spiritual ideal into a literal destination that explorers and adventurers have sought for generations. The central question, of course, is whether such a place ever existed beyond the pages of scripture and fiction. Could there be a real valley, a physical location that inspired these timeless tales of a perfect society hidden in the clouds? The search for a tangible Shangri-La has led researchers to some of the most remote and breathtaking landscapes on Earth. One of the strongest candidates is the Hunza Valley in northern Pakistan. Nestled deep within the Karakoram mountain range, Hunza is a place of astonishing beauty with lush green terraces, vibrant orchards, and a culture that has long fascinated outsiders. The people of Hunza are known for their remarkable longevity and seemingly idyllic way of life, which early 20th century travelers eagerly compared to the fictional paradise. Another compelling contender is the Forbidden Kingdom of Mustang in Nepal. Until it opened to limited tourism in the 1990s, Mustang was one of the most isolated regions in the world, a barren and windswept land dominated by a dramatic, fortress-like capital city carved into the cliffs. Its very inaccessibility and the preserved Tibetan culture of its inhabitants make it a perfect real-world analog for a hidden sanctuary. Other locations, like the Yarlung Valley in Tibet or the mystical Mount Kailash, have also been proposed as potential inspirations, each offering a unique blend of spiritual significance and geographical seclusion that fits the legend. Yet, despite decades of searching and numerous expeditions into these formidable regions, no definitive archaeological evidence has ever been found to confirm the existence of a single, specific Shangri-La. Why has this mystery proven so resistant to solution? The answer lies partly in the nature of the legend itself. The original concept of Shambhala is not meant to be a physical city one can simply walk into. In Buddhist tradition, it is a spiritual realm, a celestial paradise that is only perceptible to those who have reached a certain level of enlightenment. It exists on a different plane, making the very idea of finding its streets and buildings a fundamental misunderstanding of its purpose. Furthermore, the Himalayas form one of the most geologically active and treacherous terrains on the planet. Earthquakes, landslides, and the sheer, shifting scale of the mountains mean that entire settlements could have been buried or lost without a trace, their stories swallowed by stone and ice. The search continues, not just for a place on a map, but for the deeper human yearning that the story represents. A universal longing for peace, wisdom, and a sanctuary from the chaos of the world. A hope that perhaps, just maybe, such a paradise is still out there, waiting silently in the mist. From the misty peaks of a hidden paradise, we travel now to the open ocean, to a maritime mystery that stands as one of history's greatest what-if scenarios. In the early 15th century, the Ming Dynasty of China did something extraordinary. It launched a fleet of ships so vast, so technologically advanced that they would not be rivaled for centuries. Commanded by the formidable Admiral Zheng He, these treasure ships were colossal, with some estimates suggesting the largest were over 400 feet long, dwarfing the tiny vessels Christopher Columbus would sail nearly a century later. This was not a mere handful of ships. It was an armada of hundreds, carrying tens of thousands of sailors, soldiers, diplomats, and merchants. For almost 3 decades, this fleet dominated the Indian Ocean, projecting Chinese power and prestige from Southeast Asia all the way to the coast of East Africa. They established trade routes, exchanged lavish gifts with local rulers, and brought back wonders like giraffes to the imperial court. Then, quite abruptly in the 1430s, it all stopped. The greatest navy the world had ever seen was ordered to stand down. The ships were left to rot in their harbors, and the records of their incredible voyages were systematically destroyed. The final fleet, sent on one last mission, simply vanished from the historical record, becoming what some scholars call the Roanoke Island of the East, a reference to the famous lost colony, but on a scale that is almost incomprehensible. So, what could possibly cause an empire to abandon its global ambitions so completely? The most widely accepted theory points to a dramatic shift in political power within the Ming court. After the death of the Yongle emperor who had championed the voyages, a new faction of conservative Confucian scholars gained influence. To these officials, the treasure fleets were a monumental waste of resources. They saw the voyages as expensive ego projects that brought back curiosities rather than tangible wealth, and they believed China's focus should be inward, on fortifying its northern borders against Mongol threats and on domestic agricultural projects. The colossal cost of building, maintaining, and supplying the fleet was indeed staggering, and in the face of this new political pressure, the voyages were deemed an unnecessary extravagance. The order was given to halt all construction, and a policy of maritime isolationism, or Hagin, was enforced to focus the nation's resources. It was a deliberate, calculated decision to turn away from the sea, effectively stranding any final expedition without the support system it needed to return or report back. But the political and budgetary explanation, while compelling, doesn't fully satisfy the mystery of the final fleet's complete disappearance. This has led to more speculative and fascinating theories. Could parts of the fleet have survived and established settlements far from home? Some researchers and amateur historians have proposed that damaged ships, caught in a storm or unable to make the long return journey, might have sailed east across the Pacific, potentially making landfall in the Americas long before European explorers. While intriguing, this theory lacks solid archaeological evidence. A more plausible scenario involves the possibility that the fleet, or a significant portion of it, simply never returned to China, instead integrating into the vibrant trading networks of Southeast Asia. The sailors, skilled in shipbuilding, navigation, and warfare, would have been valuable assets in the bustling ports of the Malay archipelago. They could have married into local communities, their Chinese origins fading over generations until all specific memory of their arrival was lost to time. The fleet didn't vanish into thin air. It may have dissolved, its people and their stories assimilating into the fabric of a dozen different cultures, leaving no single clear trace for future historians to find. This grand undertaking, a symbol of China's brief moment of unquestioned global supremacy, thus ends not with a bang, but with a whisper, its ultimate fate as vast and deep as the oceans it once ruled. Leaving behind the vanished fleets of the Ming Dynasty, we journey further back in time to an even grander and more perilous enigma, one that lies buried beneath a man-made mountain in central China. This is the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the formidable and ruthless leader who first unified the warring states of China into a single empire in the 3rd century before the Common Era. His legacy is undeniable. He standardized writing, currency, and measurements, and began construction of the earliest versions of the Great Wall. But his most ambitious project was his own final resting place, a necropolis of unimaginable scale and extravagance that he began constructing the moment he ascended the throne. For decades, hundreds of thousands of laborers toiled to build this subterranean palace, a city for the dead meant to serve the emperor for all eternity. While the outside world knew of the tomb's general location for centuries, its true marvels only began to reveal themselves in the spring of 1974, when a group of local farmers digging a well stumbled upon one of the most astounding archaeological finds in human history, the Terracotta Army. Life-sized, meticulously detailed, and arranged in full military formation, this silent legion of thousands of clay soldiers, chariots, and horses was designed to protect the emperor in the afterlife. Each face is unique, a haunting individual portrait that gives this army an eerie, living presence even after more than 2,000 years. Yet, as staggering as this discovery was, the Terracotta Army is merely the outer guard, the protective perimeter of the main event. The soldiers stand in pits to the east of the central burial mound, which itself remains completely untouched, a 4-sided pyramid of earth covered in trees, rising nearly 50 meters high over the landscape. This unexcavated mound is the very heart of the mystery, the sealed chamber where the first emperor himself is believed to lie. The decision to leave it unopened is not born from a lack of curiosity, but from a profound respect for the immense technological and ethical challenges that such an undertaking would present. The first and most daunting hurdle is preservation. When archaeologists excavated the terracotta warriors, they were originally brightly painted in lifelike colors. Upon exposure to the dry air, that paint flaked and crumbled away in a matter of minutes, leaving the gray clay figures we see today. This was a catastrophic loss of historical information. The fear is that the organic treasures inside the main tomb, silks, wooden artifacts, lacquerware, and perhaps even the emperor's own remains, would face a similar or even more rapid fate. The microclimate within the sealed mound has been stable for millennia, and breaking that seal could trigger the utter destruction of everything it was meant to preserve. Scientists simply do not yet possess the technology to enter such a vast, sealed environment and control the atmosphere instantly to prevent such decay. It would be a race against time that we are almost certain to lose, resulting in an irreplaceable cultural tragedy. Then there are the legends recorded by the grand historian Sima Qian a century after the emperor's death, which described the tomb's interior in fantastical and terrifying detail. He wrote that the ceiling was inlaid with pearls to simulate the night sky, while the floor was modeled into a map of the emperor's kingdom, with flowing rivers of mercury representing the Great Yellow and Yangtze rivers. Modern scientific surveys have confirmed shockingly high concentrations of mercury vapor in the soil above the tomb, lending startling credibility to this ancient account. Mercury, of course, is a deadly neurotoxin, making any entry attempt incredibly dangerous for archaeologists. Furthermore, Sima Qian described elaborate booby traps, crossbows rigged to automatically fire at any intruder. While the mechanisms may have degraded over the centuries, the potential risk remains a serious consideration. The combination of toxic poison and ancient, unknown security measures creates a literal life or death puzzle. And finally, there is the promise of what lies within. The historical texts speak of palaces filled with priceless jewels and artifacts, a veritable universe of wealth and knowledge from the dawn of imperial China, all waiting in darkness. To open the tomb would be to solve one of history's greatest riddles, but it is a decision weighed down by the heavy responsibility of potentially destroying the very secrets we seek to uncover, leaving us to wonder if some mysteries are better left undisturbed for future generations to solve. Shifting our focus from the imperial tombs of China, we venture across the sea to the Japanese archipelago, where a different kind of mystery lies buried in the earth, not one of gold and emperors, but of clay and a way of life. Long before samurai, shoguns, or even the concept of Japan itself existed, a remarkable culture was flourishing, creating a legacy that continues to baffle archaeologists and historians today. This is the story of the Jomon people, a prehistoric society whose very name, meaning cord marked, comes from the distinctive rope-like patterns they pressed into their pottery. What makes this pottery so revolutionary is its staggering age. The earliest Jomon vessels date back over 16,000 years, making them some of the oldest known pottery in the entire world. For context, while the great civilizations of Mesopotamia were just beginning to experiment with agriculture, the Jomon were already living in settled communities, crafting complex clay figurines, and developing a sophisticated culture that would persist for an almost unimaginable 14,000 years. This incredible time span means the Jomon period is longer than all of recorded history, presenting a profound puzzle about who these people were and where they came from. The central debate surrounding the Jomon hinges on their origins. Were they the original indigenous inhabitants of the Japanese islands, having evolved directly from the Paleolithic populations that crossed land bridges during the last ice age? Or were they themselves migrants arriving in waves from different parts of Asia, bringing their advanced pottery technology with them? The evidence is complex and often contradictory. On one hand, the sheer longevity and unique character of Jomon culture suggest a deep, localized development, largely isolated from the mainland. Their pottery style is entirely distinct from anything found in Korea or China at the time, and their lifestyle, which was based on a sophisticated system of hunting, gathering, and fishing rather than full-scale agriculture, seems uniquely adapted to the rich, varied environments of the Japanese islands. Genetic studies of modern Japanese populations and ancient Jomon remains add another layer to the mystery, indicating that the Jomon represent a distinct genetic lineage that is separate from the populations that would later arrive on the islands. Yet the story is not so simple. The Jomon culture did not exist in a complete vacuum. Archaeologists have found evidence of trade and limited contact with the Korean peninsula and mainland Asia, with materials like obsidian and jade being exchanged. This suggests that while the Jomon were highly independent, they were not entirely cut off from the wider world. Some scholars propose that the knowledge of pottery making might have originally been introduced from a northern route, perhaps from Siberia, and then was developed by the Jomon to an extraordinary degree of artistic and technical complexity over millennia. The famous Dogu figurines, with their striking, almost alien-like features and elaborate designs, show a spiritual and artistic vision that has no direct parallel elsewhere. Whether they were truly the first Japanese or the result of ancient migrations, the Jomon established a cultural foundation that was both incredibly resilient and remarkably creative, a testament to human ingenuity in a prehistoric world. This long, stable chapter in human history came to a relatively abrupt end around 300 years before the Common Era, with the arrival of a new wave of people from the Asian mainland, the Yayoi. The Yayoi brought with them a technological and social revolution: wet rice agriculture, metalworking in bronze and iron, and new, more hierarchical forms of social organization. This was not necessarily a sudden, violent invasion, but rather a gradual process of migration and cultural diffusion that fundamentally transformed the archipelago. The Yayoi culture, with its more intensive farming practices, could support much larger populations, and it spread rapidly from the island of Kyushu northward toward central Honshu. In the face of this, the Jomon way of life, which had survived for hundreds of generations, began to fade. The intricate cord-marked pottery was replaced by simpler, functionally wheel-turned Yayoi ware. The old hunter-gatherer, fisher societies were either absorbed into the new agricultural communities, pushed to the remote northern frontiers of Honshu and Hokkaido, where their descendants, the Ainu, would maintain a distinct culture, or were simply displaced over time. The transition from Jomon to Yayoi leaves us with haunting, unanswered questions that echo into the present. What was the Jomon language like? It has left no written records, and while some researchers have speculated about possible connections to the languages of indigenous groups in Siberia or even the Ainu language, its sounds and structure are completely lost to time. We are left to interpret their world solely through the artifacts they left behind. The pottery, the stone circles, the pit dwellings, and the Dogu figurines, whose purpose remains a subject of intense debate. Were they fertility symbols, representations of deities, or shamanic tools for healing rituals? We may never know for certain. The societal structure of the Jomon is another enigma. Their settlements suggest a degree of social complexity, but without evidence of fortifications, pronounced wealth inequality, or large-scale warfare. They appear to have been relatively egalitarian, especially when compared to the chiefdom societies of the Yayoi. The silent, millennia-long reign of the Jomon people presents a captivating alternative narrative of human development, one of stability, deep connection to the natural world, an artistic expression that stands in stark contrast to the familiar story of constant agricultural progress and empire building. Their mystery challenges us to reconsider what we mean by civilization, and reminds us that some of history's most profound stories are those told without a single written word. From the ancient pottery of Japan, we journey westward to the lush, mountainous highlands of Laos, where a different kind of artifact creates a landscape so surreal it seems pulled from a giant's legend. Scattered across the Xingquang Plateau are thousands upon thousands of gigantic stone jars, hewn from solid rock and standing silently in clusters across the grassy plains. These are not small containers. Some tower over 3 meters tall and weigh several tons, their immense forms weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Their origins are entirely anonymous, with no written records or oral histories from the local communities to explain who made them or why. The sheer scale of the work involved is mind-boggling. Quarrying the sandstone and conglomerate, carving these colossal vessels with primitive iron tools, and then transporting them, sometimes over many kilometers, to their final resting places would have been a monumental undertaking for any society. The most widely accepted estimation, based on limited excavations and comparisons of associated artifacts, places their creation during the Iron Age, somewhere between 500 before the Common Era and 500 of the Common Era. But this timeline is still debated, leaving these silent stone sentinels as one of Southeast Asia's most captivating and enigmatic archaeological puzzles. The most persistent and logical theory, championed by French archaeologist Madeleine Colony, who conducted the first major study of the site in the 1930s, is that the jars were funerary urns. Colony discovered human ashes, bone fragments, and burial goods like beads and ceramics in and around several jars, leading her to propose that they were used for a practice of excarnation. In this process, bodies would be placed inside the massive jars to decompose, or perhaps the remains would be stored there after a sky burial or cremation. The jars, then, would be communal repositories for the dead, their imposing size perhaps reflecting the status of the individuals or families they contained. This funerary explanation fits well with the known practices of other ancient cultures in the region and provides a solemn, dignified purpose for these mysterious objects. Yet, not all researchers are fully convinced that this tells the whole story. Alternative theories, while more speculative, offer intriguing possibilities that speak to the daily life and beliefs of the jar makers. One compelling idea suggests the jars were used for fermentation, acting as giant vats for storing a rice-based alcohol for large communal feasts or ceremonial occasions. Such gatherings would have been crucial for social bonding and political alliances in a prehistoric society, and the capacity of these jars would certainly support that function. Another hypothesis considers the jars as part of a sophisticated water collection and storage system. Positioned along ancient trade routes, they could have captured monsoon rains, providing a vital, reliable water source for traveling merchants and their caravans. A more spiritual interpretation views the jars not as practical containers, but as symbolic monuments, perhaps representing the generative power of the earth or acting as territorial markers for powerful chieftains. The truth could very well be a combination of these purposes. They might have served a practical function in life and a sacred one in death, their meaning evolving over the centuries they were in use. What makes solving this mystery uniquely difficult and tragic is the dangerous reality of the landscape itself. The Xing Quang Plateau was part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and endured some of the most intense bombing campaigns in history during the Vietnam War era. As a result, the area is catastrophically littered with unexploded ordnance cluster bombs, artillery shells, and landmines that remain live and lethal to this day. This has rendered vast sections of the jar sites completely inaccessible to archaeologists. Only a handful of the dozens of known sites have been safely cleared for limited study. The presence of this deadly, modern debris means that the most significant jars, perhaps those containing the most revealing artifacts or inscriptions, might be sitting in areas too dangerous to ever enter. Every excavation is a painstaking, high-risk operation conducted in partnership with bomb disposal teams. This ongoing danger has tragically claimed lives among local villagers and continues to severely hamper research, ensuring that the secrets of the Plain of Jars remain protected not by design, but by the grim legacy of a much more recent conflict. Just as the stone jars of Laos stand as silent monuments to a lost culture, we find another profound mystery encoded not in stone, but in tiny, intricate symbols etched onto seals and amulets. Venturing now into the heart of the Indian subcontinent, we encounter the Indus Valley civilization, a society that rivaled ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia in its scale and sophistication. Flourishing from around 3,300 to 1,300 years before the Common Era across what is now Pakistan and northwest India, this was a truly monumental urban culture. Its cities, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were marvels of ancient planning, featuring the world's first known urban sanitation systems, standardized bricks, and grid-like streets that speak of a highly organized society. Yet, despite their undeniable advancements, the people of the Indus Valley left behind a secret that has stubbornly resisted all attempts at understanding: their written language. This is not a case of a few lost words, but an entire script used for centuries that remains completely undeciphered, locking away the voices of one of humanity's founding civilizations. The core of the problem lies in the nature of the inscriptions themselves. Unlike the Rosetta Stone, which provided a parallel text in 3 scripts including known ancient Greek, the Indus script has no such bilingual key. To make the challenge even greater, the surviving examples of their writing are almost universally and maddeningly short. The average inscription contains only 4 or 5 symbols, with the longest known text boasting just 26. The majority of these are found on small, carved soapstone seals, likely used for stamping clay to mark goods or property. This brevity is a cryptographer's nightmare. It's like trying to decipher a modern language using only a collection of business logos or social media hashtags. You might recognize recurring patterns, but you have no context for grammar, sentence structure, or the underlying meaning of individual words. There isn't enough continuous text to identify linguistic patterns like verb tenses or subject-predicate relationships, which are the essential building blocks for cracking an unknown code. This has led to a fierce and fundamental debate among scholars. Is it even a language at all? Some linguists argue that the number of distinct symbols, somewhere between 400 and 600, is too high for a simple alphabet but too low for a logographic system like Chinese, where each symbol represents a whole word. This suggests it could be a syllabic script where signs represent syllables. However, a minority of researchers propose a more radical idea, that the Indus script isn't a true writing system encoding speech, but rather a non-linguistic set of symbols. They suggest it might be a complex system of political or religious insignia, family clan symbols, or even a type of proto-writing used for economic transactions, conveying information without representing the spoken word. This would make it unique among the world's early civilizations, and if true, would mean we are not looking at forgotten prose, but at a collection of meaningful emblems whose full communicative power we may never fully grasp. Imagine for a moment what we could learn if we could finally hear the voices from these ancient cities. Deciphering the script would be like turning on a light in a dark room, instantly illuminating every aspect of Indus life. We could finally understand their form of governance. Were they ruled by a single priest-king, a council of merchants, or was their society remarkably egalitarian, as some archaeologists suspect? The seals themselves often depict powerful-looking animals and human-like figures in what seem to be yogic postures, potentially offering a direct window into their religious beliefs and pantheon of deities. We might be able to read their myths, their prayers, and their understanding of the cosmos. Most tantalizingly, the script could hold the ultimate answer to the civilization's greatest mystery, its decline. Around 1900 years before the Common Era, the sophisticated urban life of the Indus Valley began to crumble. The cities were gradually abandoned and their culture faded. Theories for this collapse abound, from climate change and shifting river patterns to invasions or the breakdown of trade networks. A single clear text could confirm or refute these theories, perhaps describing a great drought, a devastating flood, or a social upheaval that led to their downfall. The quest to crack the Indus Valley script continues, now aided by powerful computers and statistical analysis. Researchers meticulously map the order and frequency of symbols, searching for the syntactic rules that govern their arrangement. Yet, the barrier of short texts and the lack of a linguistic Rosetta Stone remain formidable. Each tiny seal is a locked door, and behind it lies not just a simple message of ownership, but potentially the entire story of a civilization that mastered urban living, thrived for 2,000 years, and then vanished, taking its secrets with it. Their silence is a constant reminder of how fragile our connection to the past can be, and how much history is written in codes we have yet to break. Moving from the silent symbols of the Indus Valley, we dive into the realm where myth and history converge beneath the waves, to the legendary sunken city of Dwarka. For thousands of years, the ancient Sanskrit epic, the Mahabharata, has told the story of a magnificent city built by the god hero Krishna himself. It was described as a grand, fortified capital rising from the sea, with majestic gates, opulent palaces, and bustling ports, a place of immense wealth and power. The texts recount that after Krishna's departure from the mortal world, the glorious city of Dwarka was consumed by the ocean, vanishing from sight in a single cataclysmic event. For centuries, this was understood as a powerful allegory, a divine metaphor for the end of a golden age. But what if the story was more than a myth? What if a real, prosperous ancient city actually lies beneath the sea, waiting to be found? This question drove marine archaeologists to the waters off the coast of modern-day Dwarka in Gujarat, India. Beginning in the 1980s and continuing to this day, a series of underwater excavations have revealed a landscape that eerily echoes the ancient descriptions. Submerged in depths ranging from just a few meters to over 30 meters, explorers have found massive stone structures, including large foundational blocks, walls, and what appear to be the remains of a fortified perimeter. They have uncovered stone anchors, suggesting a significant and active harbor, and a wide variety of artifacts, from pottery shards to beads and sculptures that have been recovered from the seabed. The sheer scale of the submerged ruins is compelling, pointing to a major urban settlement that was indeed claimed by the sea. For many, these discoveries are not just random archaeological finds. They are dramatic, tangible proof that the Dwarka of the Mahabharata was a real place. However, as with any great mystery, the central debate lies in the dating of these ruins. The Mahabharata places Krishna and his city in a specific, if debated, epoch, often suggested by tradition to be around 3,000 years before the Common Era. The crucial question is whether the underwater structures date back to that remote, semi-legendary period. Scientific dating methods such as thermoluminescence and carbon dating performed on artifacts and stone blocks have so far yielded dates that cluster around the second millennium before the Common Era, with some estimates pointing to a settlement that flourished around 1,500 to 2,000 years before the Common Era. While this confirms the existence of a very ancient city, it places it potentially 1,000 years later than the traditional date for the Mahabharata's events. This discrepancy is the heart of the controversy. Skeptics argue that the findings represent a later, prosperous port city that simply adopted the name and legends of the older, mythical Dwarka, and that its submergence was a gradual process caused by rising sea levels or seismic activity over centuries, not a single dramatic event. Proponents of the historical Krishna narrative offer a different interpretation. They suggest that the dating methods have limitations and that the artifacts found so far might be from the city's final phases of habitation. They argue that the original foundational structures from Krishna's time could lie beneath the currently exposed ruins, buried under millennia of silt and sand, waiting for more advanced technology to be discovered. The very fact that a major ancient city exists exactly where the legends said it would, and that it met its end in the sea, is for them overwhelming circumstantial evidence. The debate is not merely academic, it strikes at the core of faith and history, forcing a re-evaluation of ancient texts that have long been considered purely mythological. Is the sunken city off the coast of Gujarat the legendary Dwarka? The answer may depend on whether you see the ocean floor as holding the remains of a specific, divinely built capital, or as the testament to a real, powerful maritime culture whose own glorious history simply became intertwined with the epic stories that defined a civilization. Now, let's look at a tradition where honoring the dead meant reaching for the sky, quite literally. High in the rugged Cordillera Mountains of the Philippines, in the area of Sagada, you can find one of the world's most visually arresting and spiritually poignant burial customs, the hanging coffins. Suspended from the faces of sheer limestone cliffs, these wooden coffins, some weathered and ancient, others more recent, are nailed to the rock or placed within natural crevices, resting high above the ground. This was the funerary practice of the indigenous Igorot people, a tradition that persisted for centuries, if not millennia, and one that presents a dual mystery: the profound spiritual reasoning behind it and the astonishing physical feat of how it was accomplished. The spiritual beliefs that motivated this practice are deeply interwoven with the Igorot's connection to their ancestors and the natural world. For them, placing the deceased in high places was an act of both reverence and profound spiritual logic. Firstly, it was a way to bring the departed closer to the realm of the spirits, a domain often associated with the mountain peaks and the sky. Elevating the coffins was seen as a symbolic bridge, easing the soul's transition to the afterlife. Secondly, and very practically, it protected the remains from the elements and from scavengers. The cold, dry air at higher altitudes helped preserve the bodies, and the inaccessibility of the cliffs kept them safe from animals. There was also a powerful social dimension to this practice. A person's stature in life could be reflected in their final placement. The higher and more difficult the location of the coffin, the greater the honor bestowed upon the individual and their family. This was not an act of abandonment, but one of supreme respect, a final physical gesture to ensure the well-being of the soul and to maintain a tangible, watchful connection between the living community and their ancestral guardians. The practical execution of this tradition, however, is where the mystery truly deepens. How did a pre-modern society, without pulleys or modern machinery, manage to hoist heavy, often elderly, bodies and their solid wooden coffins to such dizzying, precarious heights? The process itself was a ritualized and community-driven endeavor. In many cases, the elderly would even choose their own coffin and its location while still alive. After death, the body was traditionally smoked or dried over a low fire to slow decomposition, a necessary step given the time-consuming task ahead. Then the real challenge began. The most widely accepted theory involves an intricate and dangerous use of ropes, ladders, and a great deal of coordinated human effort. Men would climb the cliffs, driving wooden pegs into the rock face to serve as anchors or footholds. Long, sturdy ropes, likely made from braided vines or plant fibers, would then be used to painstakingly haul the coffin up from below, with teams of people guiding it from the cliff top and others helping from the base. It was an incredibly risky operation, a testament to the strength, skill, and sheer determination of the community, all performed out of deep cultural duty. But this ancient practice could not withstand the tide of history. With the arrival of Spanish colonizers and later American influences, the tradition of the hanging coffins came under immense pressure. The colonizers brought with them new religions and cultural norms that viewed the practice as pagan or uncivilized. They enforced burial in cemeteries in the ground, a method that was completely alien to the Igorot spiritual worldview. This foreign imposition, combined with the gradual modernization and conversion of younger generations, led to a steep decline in the practice. While a handful of elderly community members have chosen this traditional burial in recent decades, it is now a rare event, a fading echo of a once vibrant custom. Today, the hanging coffins of Sagoda stand as silent, majestic monuments. They are a powerful tourist attraction, drawing visitors from around the world who come to witness their haunting beauty. Yet, their presence raises complex questions about cultural preservation and respect. The cliffs are a sacred burial ground, not merely a photo opportunity. The exact, ancient techniques for positioning the oldest coffins may never be fully known, as the knowledge dies with the elders who held it. These suspended tombs are more than just a historical curiosity. They are a physical manifestation of a unique spiritual relationship with the afterlife, a daring final journey that defied gravity to honor the dead, leaving a legacy etched not in words but in wood and stone against the sky. From the suspended coffins of the Philippines, we now sail to the heart of Southeast Asia's maritime history, to a kingdom so powerful it was once the master of the sea lanes, yet so elusive that its very heart remains a ghost. For 6 centuries, from the 7th to the 13th, the Srivijaya Empire reigned supreme. This was not a kingdom of sprawling inland cities and monumental temples visible for miles. Its power was built on water. Based on the island of Sumatra in modern-day Indonesia, Srivijaya was a thalassocracy, a maritime empire that controlled the vital Strait of Malacca, the choke point for trade between China and India and the markets of the Middle East. Its wealth was legendary, built on taxing the spices, silks, and precious goods that flowed through its waters. Chinese records from the Tang and Song dynasties describe it as a sophisticated and bustling center of Buddhist learning and commerce, a place where foreign merchants and scholars gathered. Arab travelers wrote of a king who commanded the seas and possessed untold riches. Yet, ask an archaeologist to point to the empire's capital city on a map, and you will be met with a shrug. The glorious city that was the nerve center of this vast commercial network has simply vanished, leaving behind one of history's most tantalizing archaeological chases. The primary reason for this disappearance lies in the very source of Srivijaya's power, its riverine environment. Historical texts, particularly those from Chinese Buddhist pilgrims like Yijing who studied there, strongly suggest the capital was a muara, a settlement located at the confluence of a river and the sea. This was a typical layout for Southeast Asian maritime kingdoms, allowing for easy control of trade moving upstream from the ocean and downstream from the interior. The most likely candidate is the Musi River in Palembang, South Sumatra. This is not a stable, solid landscape. Over the centuries, the Musi and other Sumatran rivers have carried immense amounts of silt and sediment from the volcanic, mountainous interior, gradually depositing it across the low-lying coastal plain. What was once a bustling waterfront port and a city of wooden palaces and stilt houses could, over a few hundred years, be slowly buried under meters of mud. The organic materials that made up the city, wood, thatch, bamboo, would have decayed rapidly in the humid, tropical climate, leaving little for archaeologists to find on the surface. The empire's grandeur, it seems, was literally swallowed by the earth, hidden under the very land that now supports a modern, bustling city. This has led to a compelling and frustrating theory that the heart of the Srivijaya Empire is not lost in some remote jungle, but lies buried directly beneath the modern city of Palembang. Urban archaeology is always a complex and expensive endeavor, requiring painstaking work in confined spaces between modern foundations and infrastructure. In a developing city like Palembang, the opportunity for large-scale, systematic excavation is limited. Yet, tantalizing clues have emerged to support this idea. Over the years, local fishermen and dredgers working the Musi River have pulled an astonishing array of artifacts from the muddy depths: ancient Chinese ceramics, gold rings and coins, Buddhist statues, and even fragments of inscribed stones. These finds are not from a shipwreck. They are scattered across a wide area, suggesting a settled community that simply dropped its treasures into the water or had them washed away over time. Each artifact is a whisper from the past, confirming the historical accounts of wealth and extensive trade, but they are disconnected, lacking the context of a city plan or the foundation of a royal palace. They are the empire's scattered jewels, proof of its existence, but not a map to its center. The mystery of Srivijaya's capital is further deepened by its unique political structure. Some scholars now believe that Srivijaya was not a centralized empire with a single, fixed capital in the way we think of ancient Rome or Chang'an. Instead, it might have been a more fluid mandala state, a network of powerful port cities and river-mouth settlements that all owed allegiance to a paramount ruler. The seat of this ruler could have shifted over time from one strategic location to another along the Sumatran coast, from Palembang to Jambi, or even to a site that is now completely submerged due to rising sea levels. This would explain why no single massive urban ruin has been found. The power and population were distributed across a constellation of trading hubs, each controlling a segment of the maritime web. The capital wasn't so much a single lost city, but a shifting center of gravity that moved with the political and economic currents of the age. This theory transforms the search from a quest for one specific location to a broader, more complex effort to map an entire network of settlements, many of which may be hidden under modern development or coastal sediments. The lost kingdom of Srivijaya, therefore, continues to guard its secrets not through distance, but through a kind of historical camouflage, its heart buried in mud, its structure dissolved into the landscape, challenging us to rethink what an empire can look like. Crossing from the maritime mysteries of Southeast Asia, we arrive at the formidable frontiers of ancient Persia, where a wall of staggering proportions once guarded an empire. Stretching for nearly 200 kilometers through the green plains of what is now northern Iran, the Great Wall of Gorgan is a defensive marvel that rivals any of its more famous counterparts. Often called the Red Snake for the distinctive color of its fired bricks, this colossal barrier is an unsung giant of ancient military engineering. To truly grasp its scale, consider this. Its length surpasses the combined total of Hadrian's Wall in Britain and the entire system of Western Roman frontier fortifications known as the Limes. Yet, despite its immense physical presence, the wall is shrouded in questions, primarily centered on two fundamental puzzles: which powerful empire was responsible for its construction, and what exact threat was it designed to counter in this remote corner of the ancient world? The debate over the wall's builders is a classic archaeological tug-of-war, with compelling evidence on both sides. The two main contenders are the Parthian Empire, which ruled from the mid-3rd century before the Common Era to the early 3rd century of the Common Era, and the Sasanian Empire, which rose to power immediately after and lasted until the Arab conquests in the 7th century. Proponents of a Parthian origin point to the sophisticated brick-making techniques used in the wall's construction. The entire barrier is made from standardized, uniformly sized fired bricks, a technology the Parthians are known to have perfected for their monumental architecture. Furthermore, the strategic need for such a fortification existed during the Parthian era, as they faced constant pressure from nomadic confederations like the Alans and other steppe peoples to their north. A structure of this magnitude would have been a logical, if ambitious, response to secure their fertile and wealthy northeastern provinces. On the other side of the argument, many scholars lean towards a Sasanian origin, and the evidence here is equally persuasive. The Sasanians were renowned for their extensive and highly organized military infrastructure. They constructed several massive defensive walls along their empire's frontiers, and the Great Wall of Gorgan fits perfectly within this pattern of grand, state-sponsored defensive works. Archaeological excavations of the forts attached to the wall have uncovered Sasanian-era pottery, coins, and military equipment, providing what many consider to be the most direct physical link to its occupants. The Sasanian Empire also existed during a period of heightened conflict with northern tribes, including the Hephthalites or White Huns, who were a formidable and persistent threat. The sheer logistical effort required to build the wall, involving an estimated workforce in the tens of thousands, vast brick-making kilns, and a sophisticated canal system to transport water and materials, aligns perfectly with the capabilities and centralized power of the Sasanian state. The question remains unresolved, as the wall could have been initiated by one empire and then completed, reinforced, or simply maintained by the other, leaving its true genesis a complex, layered mystery. Beyond the identity of its builders lies the even more intriguing question of its precise strategic function. A wall nearly 200 kilometers long is not merely a line in the sand, it was a deeply integrated military ecosystem. It wasn't just a barrier, but a controlled corridor. Along its length, archaeologists have identified the remains of over 30 forts, spaced at regular intervals, which would have housed thousands of elite soldiers. These were not isolated garrisons, but part of a coordinated defense in-depth system. The presence of a parallel canal running alongside much of the wall reveals another layer of its genius. This waterway served multiple purposes. It provided drinking water for the troops, acted as a moat to make the wall more difficult to assault, and most importantly, it was a transportation highway for swiftly moving troops and supplies to any threatened point along the line. This combination of static defense and dynamic mobility suggests a highly sophisticated military doctrine. So, what specific enemy justified this monumental effort and expense? The primary candidates are the various nomadic groups emanating from the Central Asian steppes. These were not disorganized raiders but powerful, mobile confederations like the Huns or the aforementioned Hephthalites. Their strength lay in their cavalry-fast, hard-hitting horsemen who could launch devastating raids into settled territories to plunder wealth and capture slaves. A simple fortified line would have been insufficient against such a fluid foe. The Great Wall of Gorgon, with its continuous barrier, its forts for garrisoning cavalry to launch counterattacks, and its signaling systems for communication, was the perfect solution. It would have funneled nomadic incursions into predictable channels, slowing them down and forcing them into engagements where the disciplined, heavy cavalry of the Persians held the advantage. It transformed an open frontier into a controlled killing ground, protecting the wealthy agricultural heartlands of the empire from the constant, draining threat of nomadic predation. The Red Snake thus stands as a silent testament to a long-forgotten Cold War, a desperate and brilliantly engineered solution to one of the ancient world's most persistent security dilemmas, its builders and its fullest story still whispering from beneath the Iranian soil. While the Great Wall of Gorgon represents a massive, tangible mystery, our next enigma is almost its opposite, a kingdom that faded so completely. It's as if it was written in invisible ink on the pages of history. Nestled in the mountainous landscapes of what is now northern Thailand, the kingdom of Ungonyong was a crucial yet elusive power. It flourished from roughly the 7th to the 13th centuries of the Common Era and is recognized as the direct political and cultural precursor to the famous Lanna Kingdom, which would later dominate the region with its glorious capital at Chiang Mai. But where Lanna left behind a rich legacy of temples, art, and written histories, Ungonyong has proven far more evasive. This was not a minor chiefdom. It was a significant force, a hub for trade and culture that connected the highlands of Southeast Asia. Yet its story is one of gradual fading, a disappearance so thorough that even the precise location of its capital city, which historical sources call Yonok, remains a subject of intense debate and speculation among scholars. The primary challenge in uncovering Ungonyong's story is the nature of the evidence itself. We don't have grand royal archives or detailed chronicles written by its own scribes. Instead, our knowledge is pieced together like a fragile mosaic from a handful of disparate and often contradictory sources. The most important of these are stone inscriptions, etched in ancient Mon and Thai scripts, which mention Ungonyong's rulers and their deeds. These inscriptions are invaluable, but they are also maddeningly brief, offering flashes of insight without the full narrative context. Later chronicles, written by the kingdoms that succeeded Ungonyong, such as the Lanna and Burmese courts, do refer to it, but these were composed centuries after the fact. They often blend historical fact with mythological origin stories, making it difficult to separate the kingdom's true history from the legendary aura that later generations projected onto it. It's a process of historical detective work where every clue is a fragment and the master blueprint is missing. The greatest of these fragments is the mystery of its capital, the city of Yonok. The search for this lost city is a central quest in Thai archaeology, driven by tantalizing clues from the chronicles. These texts describe a prosperous city situated on the shores of a large lake. They recount a dramatic legend that the city was ultimately destroyed when the earth opened up and the lake drained away, swallowing the settlement whole. This captivating cataclysm, whether entirely mythical or based on a real geological event like an earthquake or a massive landslide, provides a vivid explanation for the city's disappearance. The challenge for modern researchers is to find a geographical location that matches this description. Several sites have been proposed as the true location of Yona. One strong candidate is the area around modern-day Jiangxin, a district on the Mekong River known for its own ancient ruins. Another possibility lies further west near the city of Fang. Archaeological surveys in these regions have unearthed evidence of ancient moats, fortified settlements, and artifacts dating to the correct period, but no single site has yet produced a definitive, incontrovertible piece of evidence, like an inscription bearing the city's name, that would solve the mystery once and for all. The capital of this foundational kingdom remains a ghost, its true location potentially buried under a modern town, hidden in dense jungle, or perhaps still lying beneath the sediments of a long-vanished lake. So, what ultimately happened to the kingdom of Ngonyong? Its disappearance wasn't likely a single, catastrophic event, but rather a complex process of transformation and absorption. The most widely accepted theory is that Ngonyong did not so much vanish as it evolved. In the late 13th century, a powerful new ruler, King Mangrai, emerged from this cultural and political milieu. Mangrai is a towering figure in northern Thai history, credited with founding the city of Chiang Rai in 1262, and most famously, establishing Chiang Mai as the new capital of the Lanna Kingdom in 1296. It is believed that Mangrai was a descendant of the old Ngonyong royal line. His great achievement was to consolidate the various city-states and principalities of the region into a single, stronger, and more centralized kingdom. In this context, the kingdom of Ngonyong was not destroyed, it was superseded. The political center of gravity simply shifted from the old, perhaps declining or geographically damaged capital of Yonok to the new, strategically positioned urban centers of Chiang Rai and Chiang Mai. The people, the culture, and the traditions of Ngonyong lived on, but they were now part of a new and more resilient political entity, the Lanna Kingdom. This transition, however, created a profound gap in the historical record. The rise of Lanna was so brilliant and influential that it effectively cast a shadow over its own predecessor. The scribes and historians of the powerful new kingdom had every reason to document the glorious reign of Mangrai and his successors, potentially at the expense of preserving the older, more fragmented history of Ngonyong. Its records may have been lost, neglected, or simply not copied as the new court focused on building its own legacy. The disappearance of the Ngonyong kingdom is therefore a reminder of how history is written by the victors and the successors. A kingdom that was vital for centuries, that laid the entire cultural and political groundwork for one of Southeast Asia's most celebrated civilizations, somehow slipped through the cracks, its full story waiting to be unearthed literally from the soil of northern Thailand. Leaping from the fading kingdoms of Southeast Asia, we now cross the vast Pacific Ocean to the jungles of Mesoamerica, to a mystery that intriguingly ties the ancient Maya back to the Asian continent. Deep within the magnificent ruins of Palenque in present-day Mexico lies a tomb that overturned our understanding of Maya power structures, the final resting place of a woman now famously known as the Red Queen. Discovered in 1994, her burial chamber was found within a stunning pyramid known as Temple 13, a location of clear importance. The moniker Red Queen was given not because of her name, but because of the astonishing condition of her remains. She had been covered in a vibrant, brilliant red powder made from cinnabar, a mercury-based pigment, a treatment reserved for individuals of the highest, most sacred status. For a long time, archaeologists assumed that any figure of such immense prestige at Palenque must have been male, perhaps the great King Pakal himself. But the analysis of the skeleton confirmed it was a woman, sending shockwaves through the field and introducing the world to one of the most powerful female rulers of the ancient Americas, a figure whose true identity and origins have sparked a fascinating cross-oceanic debate. The most widely accepted and historically supported theory identifies the Red Queen as Lady Kayable, who lived in the 7th century of the Common Era. Inscriptions at Palenque describe Lady Kayable as a Ix Kalumt, a title translating to Supreme Warrior, a rank that was often higher than even that of her husband, the king. She was a princess from the mighty Snake Kingdom, a strategic marriage alliance that brought Palenque under the influence of a dominant superpower. The artifacts found with the Red Queen powerfully support this identification. A stunning alabaster vase discovered in the tomb bears an inscription naming it as the possession of Lady Kayable, and the timing of the burial, the location, and the unparalleled reverence shown all point to this formidable historical figure. She was not merely a queen consort, she was a co-ruler, a military leader, and a political heavyweight in her own right, her authority seemingly deriving from her own royal bloodline. The mystery, then, is not necessarily who she was, but rather where her own profound power and the origins of her lineage might ultimately lead. This is where the connection to Asia enters the picture, not as a mainstream archaeological conclusion, but as a provocative and enduring speculative theory. The idea of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, the possibility that ancient civilizations from Asia or elsewhere visited the Americas long before Christopher Columbus, has captivated imaginations for centuries. Proponents of this theory point to certain cultural and artistic parallels that they find difficult to explain by independent invention. They note similarities in specific artistic motifs, such as the depiction of lotus flowers or serpent deities, which appear in both Asian and Mesoamerican art. Some even suggest that the distinct facial features of certain Maya figures, including depictions of Lady Kayable herself on stelae, bear a resemblance to artistic styles from Southeast Asia or China. The broader hypothesis is that skilled mariners, perhaps from China or the maritime cultures of Southeast Asia like the Srivijaya Empire, could have used ocean currents to cross the Pacific, bringing with them not only goods but also ideas, artistic concepts, and perhaps even royal lineages that influenced the development of Mesoamerican states. In this speculative framework, a powerful figure like Lady Kayable could represent a descendant of such an ancient contact, her very presence a clue to a lost chapter of global interconnection. Mainstream archaeology, however, treats these transoceanic theories with significant skepticism. The overwhelming consensus is that the great civilizations of the Americas, including the Maya, developed in complete isolation from the Old World for thousands of years. Scholars argue that the similarities cited by diffusionists are either superficial coincidences or the result of common human psychology solving similar problems in similar ways. The development of pyramid building, complex calendars, and stratified societies occurred independently in both the Old and New Worlds, a testament to parallel human innovation rather than shared instruction. The official narrative holds that Lady Kayable's power was entirely homegrown, a product of the intricate and dynamic political landscape of the Maya world itself. Her high status is explained by the crucial role of women in Maya royalty as conduits of political legitimacy and bloodline. She was the vessel for a powerful alliance, and her Supreme Warrior title was likely both a religious and military designation unique to the Maya cultural sphere, with no need for an external explanation. The true answer to the riddle of the Red Queen's connections may ultimately lie not in broad theories, but in the hard scientific evidence slowly being extracted from her tomb. Modern biochemical analysis of her remains offers a potential path to resolving the debate. Isotopic analysis of her teeth and bones can reveal where she spent her childhood by measuring the unique chemical signatures of the local water and food. If this analysis were to show she was born and raised in the Patane region of Guatemala, the heartland of the Snake Kingdom, it would strongly support the traditional narrative of her as a local elite. However, if the isotopes were to indicate an origin far outside the Maya world, it would, of course, revolutionize our understanding, Furthermore, advanced DNA sequencing could, in theory, trace her genetic ancestry. While recovering ancient DNA from tropical environments is notoriously difficult due to rapid degradation, any successful results could reveal deep ancestral links. Finding genetic markers common in East or Southeast Asian populations in her genome would be a seismic discovery, though it would still need to be carefully interpreted, as such a connection would likely date back to the original peopling of the Americas over 15,000 years ago, not to a more recent transoceanic voyage. For now, the Red Queen guards her deepest secrets. She sits at the center of a historical crossroads, a powerful Maya ruler who simultaneously embodies a tantalizing global possibility. Her story a reminder that the human past may be far more interconnected and far more mysterious than our textbooks have yet dared to admit. We now journey from the humid jungles of the Maya to the flat, agricultural plains surrounding the ancient Chinese city of Xi'an, a region so steeped in history that it seems to breathe it from the very soil. Here, scattered across the landscape, lies a site that challenges our conventional understanding of ancient Chinese architecture. These are not the familiar, towering pagodas or the sweeping roofs of imperial palaces. These are pyramids. Dozens of massive, pyramid-shaped mounds rise from the earth, some isolated in fields, others clustered together in silent, overgrown groups. Unlike the stone pyramids of Egypt or Mesoamerica, these structures are earthen colossal piles of rammed earth, now softened by centuries of wind and rain and blanketed in trees and grass, making them look from a distance almost like natural hills. But their distinct geometric shapes, the clear, deliberate angles visible from the air, betray their human origin. For a long time, their existence was largely unknown to the outside world, obscured by a combination of geographical remoteness and official secrecy, creating a modern archaeological enigma literally hiding in plain sight. The first confirmed Western sighting of these structures is a story in itself, emerging not from an archaeological dig, but from the chaos of the Second World War. In 1945, as the war was drawing to a close, American pilot James Gaussman was flying a supply mission over central China when he reported seeing what he described as a gigantic, pure white pyramid of stunning proportions, seemingly coated in a gleaming, metallic-like material. His account was initially dismissed as a flight of fancy, but later, in the 1990s, another pilot and author named Bruce Cathy brought renewed attention to the story, sparking public curiosity. The Chinese government, however, remained largely silent on the matter. This official reticence has been one of the defining characteristics of the mystery. While the existence of the pyramids is no longer denied, access to them for foreign archaeologists and even for independent researchers has been extremely limited. Many of the mounds are located within restricted military zones or on land that is difficult to access without special permission, effectively creating a protective, and some would say obstructive, barrier around them. This has inevitably fueled speculation about what exactly the authorities might be protecting or hiding within these ancient structures. So, what are these colossal earthworks? The most widely accepted and logical theory is that they are the monumental tombs of early Chinese emperors, particularly from the Western Han Dynasty, which ruled from 206 before the Common Era to 9 of the Common Era. The Han Dynasty was a golden age of power, prosperity, and cultural consolidation, and its rulers were known for constructing lavish underground tombs to ensure their comfort and authority in the afterlife. The most famous example, which lends enormous credibility to this theory, is the tomb of Emperor Jing Dai, which has been partially excavated and opened to the public as a museum. His burial complex includes a large, pyramid-shaped mound, and the surrounding pits were found to contain a breathtaking terracotta army of a different kind, thousands of miniature, delicately crafted figurines of soldiers, servants, and animals, a complete subterranean court frozen in time. This discovery strongly suggests that many of the other unexcavated pyramids in the area are likely the resting places of other Han emperors and their powerful nobles, each potentially holding similar, unimaginable treasures and armies of clay waiting for the moment of discovery. But the Han Dynasty theory does not entirely satisfy the mystery for everyone. Some of the larger pyramids, including the one reportedly seen by Gaussman, are attributed by local tradition to a much more ancient and legendary period. The most prominent of these is the so-called White Pyramid, often linked to the semi-mythical Yellow Emperor Huang Dai, a cultural hero said to have ruled in the mists of the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. If a pyramid of that scale were indeed his tomb, it would not only rewrite Chinese history but world history, suggesting a level of social organization and architectural ambition in China that predates even the earliest Egyptian pyramids by centuries. While mainstream scholars heavily discount this, the possibility points to a deeper, more tantalizing question. Could some of these mounds be the legacy of even older, unknown rulers from a civilization that has been lost to time? A culture so ancient that its name and deeds have been completely erased from the historical record, leaving only these immense, silent shapes as a testament to existence. The reasons for the cautious, slow approach to excavating these pyramids are complex and not solely based on secrecy. Chinese archaeologists, like their counterparts facing the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, are deeply concerned with preservation. The terracotta figurines from Emperor Jing Dai's tomb were preserved in near-perfect condition precisely because they remained sealed in their dark, stable, humid environment for 2,000 years. The fear is that opening a larger, grander tomb could lead to a catastrophic repeat of what happened with the terracotta warriors of the first emperor, where their vibrant paint flaked off within minutes of exposure to the air. The contents of these pyramids, silks, lacquerware, wooden documents, and organic remains, could be far more fragile and susceptible to immediate decay. The technology to safely enter and stabilize such a vast, sealed microenvironment simply may not be advanced enough yet to risk what could be inside. For Chinese authorities, these are not merely archaeological sites. They are the sacred tombs of the founders of their civilization, and the responsibility to protect them from harm is immense. The decision to leave them buried is a deliberate, calculated choice, a race against time to develop the scientific methods needed to ensure that when the seal is finally broken, we do not destroy the very history we seek to uncover. The true contents of China's ancient pyramids, therefore, remain one of the great held breaths of archaeology, a secret kept not by conspiracy, but by a profound and patient reverence for the fragile treasures of the past. Crossing from the architectural enigmas of mainland Asia, we set sail into the world's greatest ocean, to a mystery written not in stone or script, but in the waves and winds themselves. This is the story of the Lapita people, the true pioneers of the Pacific, whose seafaring exploits represent one of the most astonishing and rapid human migrations in our entire history. Beginning around 3,500 years ago, these incredible voyagers launched themselves into the immense blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean, moving eastward from the islands near Southeast Asia, through the archipelagos now known as Melanesia, and ultimately reaching the far-flung islands of remote Oceania, places like Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga. What makes their journey so utterly mind-boggling is the scale of the emptiness they crossed. Unlike the earlier settlement of near Oceania, where islands were often visible from one another, the leap into remote Oceania meant voyaging for days or even weeks across vast, open sea with no land in sight, navigating solely by their deep understanding of the natural world. In their wake, they left one consistent and tantalizing clue: a trail of uniquely decorated pottery, shards of which are found on island after island, creating a breadcrumb trail of ceramic that marks their passage across thousands of kilometers of ocean. The central, breathtaking mystery is twofold. How did they accomplish these perilous voyages with what we would consider Neolithic technology, and what powerful force drove them to keep pushing ever further into the unknown? The key to the how lies in a sophisticated blend of technology, environmental knowledge, and sheer human courage that modern science is only beginning to fully appreciate. Their vessels were not simple rafts or dugout canoes. They were sophisticated double-hulled sailing canoes, essentially the catamarans of the ancient world. Built from expertly carved and planed wood, lashed together with strong cordage made from coconut fiber, these craft were remarkably stable and capable of carrying dozens of people, along with their essential cargo, live animals like pigs and chickens, planting materials for crops like taro and yam, and of course, fresh water. Their seaworthiness has been proven by modern replicas which have successfully recreated these epic voyages, but the boat was only part of the equation. The true genius of the Lapita was their mastery of non-instrument navigation, a skill that is still practiced by a few master navigators in the Pacific today. They were master readers of the ocean and the sky. They memorized the paths of hundreds of stars, using them as a celestial compass. They understood the subtle patterns of ocean swells, how waves would refract around unseen islands, creating a distinct pattern that could be felt through the hull of the canoe. They watched for specific species of birds, knowing their flight ranges would indicate the direction of land. They could interpret the color of the clouds and the taste of the wind. This was not a matter of guessing. It was a complex, accumulated science passed down through generations, a mental map of the Pacific that allowed them to traverse what appeared to be a trackless wilderness with deliberate purpose. Understanding what propelled this rapid expansion, however, leads us into a more complex and debated area. The traditional and perhaps most intuitive explanation is population pressure. As successful Lapita communities established themselves on an island, their populations would naturally grow, potentially straining local resources like available land for their gardens or coastal fishing grounds. This would create a powerful incentive for groups to venture forth in search of new, uninhabited islands. It was a classic push of necessity. Another compelling theory suggests that the migration was driven as much by pull as by push, by a powerful culture of exploration and the social prestige that came with discovering and founding new settlements. In such a society, the greatest honor and status might be accorded not just to a skilled warrior, but to the daring navigator who could lead a canoe to a new island and claim it for his lineage. This spirit of discovery could have become a self-perpetuating cultural engine, with each new generation feeling compelled to outdo the last, to sail just a little bit further into the rising sun. A more recent and fascinating hypothesis introduces trade as a central motivator. The one unifying artifact of the Lapita culture is their pottery, particularly a style of finely made earthenware decorated with intricate geometric patterns that were stamped into the clay with a toothed tool. These designs are so distinctive and consistent across vast distances that they point to a shared cultural identity. Some archaeologists now believe that the Lapita were not just migrating farmers, but also a network of linked communities engaged in long-distance exchange. Certain materials, like obsidian for sharp tools, have been traced from their specific island sources to Lapita sites hundreds of kilometers away. This suggests that some voyages were not blind searches for new land, but deliberate trading missions between established communities. The quest for new sources of valued resources, or to maintain control over these valuable trade networks, could have provided a powerful economic impetus for their continued exploration and expansion, weaving a web of connection across the seascape. Then we have the pottery itself, the beautiful, fragile, and enigmatic calling card of the Lapita people. Found in fragments on beaches and in ancient village sites, this pottery is the primary physical evidence we have of their presence. The intricate designs featuring faces, eyes, and complex geometric patterns are thought to hold deep symbolic meaning, possibly related to their ancestor worship or spiritual beliefs. Yet, after several centuries of prolific production and use, the tradition of making this distinctive pottery suddenly disappears from the archaeological record throughout most of the Pacific. This cessation is one of the great silent transitions in prehistory. Why would such a culturally significant and technically advanced craft simply be abandoned? The most plausible explanation is a process of cultural adaptation and localization. As the Lapita descendants settled into their new island homes over many generations, they became the Polynesian peoples we know today. Their societies evolved in relative isolation from their Western cousins. In their new environments, the need for delicate, breakable pottery on long voyages may have diminished. They may have developed alternative methods of cooking and storage, using more durable materials like earth ovens, wooden bowls, and baskets. The knowledge of pottery making, once central to their identity, may have slowly faded, becoming an unnecessary skill in a world of abundant alternatives. The Lapita did not vanish, they transformed, their legacy living on not in clay, but in the languages, cultures, and unparalleled navigational knowledge of their Polynesian descendants, who would go on to complete the settlement of the Pacific, reaching from Hawaii to New Zealand to Rapa Nui. Their story is the ultimate human adventure, a testament to our species' relentless curiosity and our profound ability to not just survive, but to conquer the greatest wilderness on Earth using nothing but intellect, courage, and the stars as their guide. But the ocean was not the only keeper of secrets during the global conflict of the Second World War. The mountains and jungles of the Philippines conceal a legend of wealth so vast it borders on the fantastical. This is the story of Yamashita's gold, a modern historical mystery that blends documented war crimes with unverified tales of unimaginable treasure, creating a siren song that has lured fortune hunters to their doom for decades. The legend centers on General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya, who was appointed the Japanese commander in the Philippines in 1944, just as the tide of war was turning decisively against Japan. As the story goes, the Japanese Imperial Army had spent years systematically looting the occupied territories of Southeast Asia, confiscating gold bullion from banks, melting down religious artifacts from temples, and seizing private collections of diamonds and gemstones from wealthy families. This colossal hoard, representing the pillaged wealth of an entire region, was allegedly transported to the Philippines for temporary safekeeping. The plan was to ship it to Japan later, but with American naval and air superiority making the sea lanes impassable, the treasure needed to be hidden. General Yamashita is said to have overseen a frantic operation where engineers and prisoners of war constructed elaborate booby-trap tunnels and hidden chambers deep within the Philippine jungle, burying the treasure just before his forces surrendered. Yamashita himself was tried for war crimes and executed in 1946, taking the specific locations of these hidden vaults, if they ever existed, to his grave, sparking one of the greatest treasure hunts of the 20th century. The credibility of this tale rests on a compelling, though circumstantial, foundation. We know for a historical fact that the Japanese military did engage in widespread looting. It was an official policy to fund their war effort. Accounts from intelligence officers and post-war investigations confirm that vast quantities of gold, particularly from Singapore and other financial centers, did indeed vanish. The Philippines, with its complex geography of over 7,000 islands, its labyrinthine cave systems, and its dense, nearly impassable jungle, was a logical choice for a last-ditch hiding place. Furthermore, the timeline fits. The Japanese had control of the archipelago and were under intense pressure from advancing American forces, creating a scenario where hiding assets rather than moving them was a strategic necessity. Adding a layer of dark intrigue to the story are the persistent rumors of Golden Lily, the code name for a secret operation run by Emperor Hirohito's brother, Prince Yasuhiko Chichibu, which was allegedly tasked specifically with seizing and hiding this wealth to finance Japan's post-war recovery. These elements combine to create a narrative that feels just plausible enough to be irresistibly tantalizing, suggesting that a historical wrong could be righted and a fortune reclaimed by whoever is clever or lucky enough to find it. This potent mix of history and legend has fueled an endless and often tragic treasure hunt. For more than 70 years, a colorful cast of characters, from former Japanese soldiers with fading maps to local farmers dreaming of a better life, to wealthy international businessmen funding high-tech expeditions, have scoured the mountains of Luzon and other islands. They have used everything from shovels and pickaxes to ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery in their quest. There have been countless claims of discovery, but no single find has ever been universally authenticated or led to the recovery of a treasure trove matching the legend's scale. One of the most famous figures in this hunt was Rogelio Roxas, a Filipino locksmith who claimed in the 1971s that he had found a vast chamber filled with gold bullion and a golden Buddha statue in a tunnel near Baguio. His story led to a famous lawsuit against the estate of former Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, whom Roxas accused of stealing the treasure from him. While a Hawaiian court eventually awarded his estate a judgment, the gold itself never materialized publicly, and the case ultimately added more layers of conspiracy and hearsay to the myth rather than providing concrete proof. The lack of any verified discovery points to the fundamental problems at the heart of the Yamashita treasure mystery. The first and most significant issue is the complete absence of any official, verifiable documentation from the Japanese side. If such a meticulous hiding operation occurred, one would expect to find engineering plans, duty rosters, or coded messages referring to it. None have ever surfaced in any public or declassified archive. Skeptics argue that the legend is just that, a powerful myth, possibly seeded by a few isolated incidents of hidden military payrolls or officers' caches that were wildly exaggerated over time. They suggest that the vast majority of the looted gold was likely smuggled back to Japan through submarines or other clandestine means before the blockade was fully in place, or was simply spent on the war effort itself. Another grim possibility is that the treasure's guardians, the engineers and prisoners of war who built the hiding places, were all executed to protect the secret, a war crime that would have effectively erased the trail from human memory. This theory is supported by anecdotal tales of skeletons being found near suspected tunnel sites, their stories forever silenced. Ultimately, the enduring power of the Yamashita's gold legend lies less in its potential for wealth and more in what it represents. It is a ghost story for the modern age, a narrative that gives tangible form to the immense, unquantifiable suffering and loss of the war. The treasure is not just gold, it is the collective plunder of a brutal occupation, the lost inheritances of millions, and the unaccounted for spoils of a global conflict. The endless search for it is a quest for closure, for a piece of evidence that makes sense of the chaos and greed of that dark period. It is a mystery kept alive by human nature, by our desire for a hidden map, a secret code, a story where perseverance and a little luck can lead to a life-changing discovery. But until a tunnel is opened under incontrovertible circumstances to reveal stacks of gold bars stamped with the seals of 1930s Asian banks, the lost treasure of Yamashita will remain exactly where it has always been, a glittering phantom in the shadows of the Philippine jungle, a dream of riches that continues to captivate and elude all who seek it. Yet another profound mystery lies not in a lost city or a buried treasure, but in the living heritage of a people whose origins seem to reach back to a different chapter of human history altogether. In the northern reaches of Japan, on the island of Hokkaido, and spilling across the sea to parts of Russia's Sakhalin Island and the Kuril archipelago, live the Ainu people. To encounter Ainu culture is to step into a world that stands in stark contrast to the familiar image of Japan. Historically, their way of life was deeply interwoven with the northern forests and seas, revolving around bear hunting, salmon fishing, and a spiritual world, you where every element of nature, from the fire in the hearth to the mountains on the horizon, was considered a divine being or kami. The men were known for their dense beards and robust body hair, while the women had distinctive facial tattoos around their mouths and on their hands, markings that were considered a crucial rite of passage and a form of spiritual protection. Their language, the Ainu language, is a complete isolate, sharing no recognizable grammatical or vocabulary links with Japanese or any other known language family, sounding entirely alien to the ear of their neighbors. For centuries, this profound difference fueled a misleading and oppressive narrative, casting the Ainu as primitive relics. But modern science is now revealing a far more complex and ancient truth, positioning them as the key to unlocking the deepest genetic and cultural secrets of the Japanese archipelago. The central enigma of the Ainu is quite simply where they fit in the grand story of human migration and settlement in East Asia. Their distinct physical characteristics, often described as more Caucasoid, with features that can appear closer to indigenous Siberian groups than to the Yamato Japanese, have long been the subject of speculation. The mystery deepens when we consider the historical context of Japan's main islands, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. You'll recall our earlier discussion about the Jomon people, the prehistoric culture that inhabited these islands for an astonishing 14,000 years, creating the world's oldest pottery. The prevailing theory, supported by a growing body of genetic evidence, posits that the Ainu are the direct descendants, or at least the closest living relatives of these ancient Jomon people. While the Yayoi migrants from the mainland brought wet rice agriculture and new technologies, leading to the culture we now recognize as Japanese, they primarily settled in the southern and central parts of the archipelago. The Jomon populations in the north, particularly in Hokkaido, were largely bypassed by this demographic and cultural wave. In this remote refuge, the descendants of the Jomon were able to preserve their unique genetic lineage and cultural identity, evolving over millennia into the Ainu people we know today. They are not newcomers or outsiders. They are, in a very real sense, the enduring echo of Japan's first inhabitants. This connection creates a fascinating puzzle that genetics is helping to piece together, though the picture is not yet complete. Analysis of ancient Jomon skeletal remains and the DNA of modern Ainu volunteers reveals a unique genetic profile. They carry a significant amount of a specific ancestry that is distinct from the primary East Asian ancestry found in the Yamato Japanese population. This unique component is often labeled as Jomon ancestry or ancient North Eurasian, linking them to very ancient populations that once spanned a vast territory from Siberia to Europe. This genetic distinctiveness confirms their long-term isolation and deep roots in the region. However, the story is not one of pure isolation. The Ainu genome also shows evidence of admixture or mixing with other groups over time, including contributions from the Okhotsk people, a maritime culture that once inhabited Sakhalin and northern Hokkaido, and even some very minor gene flow from the neighboring Nivk people of Siberia. This genetic tapestry tells a story of a people who were primarily descended from the archipelago's first settlers, but who were also part of a dynamic northern cultural sphere, interacting and exchanging genes with other populations across the Sea of Okhotsk. The profound cultural and linguistic differences between the Ainu and their Japanese neighbors are a direct reflection of this separate historical trajectory. The Ainu language, now critically endangered with very few fluent elders remaining, is a linguistic treasure chest with no known relatives. Linguists have proposed various connections over the years, linking it to languages as far afield as the Basque language in Europe or the native languages of North America, but none of these proposals have gained widespread acceptance. The prevailing view is that it is a true language isolate, the last surviving branch of a linguistic family that was once spoken by the Jomon people across the islands. This linguistic isolation underscores just how deep the cultural divide is. Similarly, their spiritual practices centered on the Iamonte, the ritual sending back of the bear spirit, and their intricate oral epics known as yukar, represent a worldview that developed independently from the Shinto and Buddhist traditions that came to dominate the mainland. Their entire cultural universe is a testament to a different path of human development, one that revered the untamed wilderness rather than seeking to cultivate and order it. Unfortunately, the modern history of the Ainu is a painful chapter of assimilation and discrimination. As Japan modernized during the Meiji era, the government implemented policies aimed at forcibly integrating the Ainu, seizing their traditional lands, banning their language and customs like tattooing, and imposing Japanese names and education. They were officially classified as former Aborigines, a label intended to erase their distinct identity and absorb them into the homogeneous Japanese state. For decades, they were rendered invisible in their own homeland, their culture driven to the brink of extinction. It is only in recent years that a significant shift has begun to occur. In 2008, the Japanese government finally officially recognized the Ainu as an indigenous people of Japan, and in 2019, new legislation was passed to promote and support Ainu culture. This belated acknowledgement has sparked a cultural revival, with a new generation of Ainu passionately working to reclaim their language, revitalize their crafts like wood carving and embroidery, and assert their place in the modern world. The ongoing research into Ainu origins, therefore, is more than an academic exercise. It is a crucial part of this reclamation. Every genetic study and archaeological find that strengthens their link to the ancient Jomon is a validation of their historical presence and their unique contribution to the human story. They are not a minority group on the fringe of Japanese history. They are the living bridge to its very beginning. The mystery of the Ainu people forces a fundamental rethinking of Japanese identity, challenging the long-held myth of a single, homogeneous nation. Their story is a powerful reminder that the maps of human history are often far more complex and layered than they appear, and that the keys to our deepest past are sometimes held not in dusty ruins, but in the living memory and resilient spirit of a people who have carried their ancient heritage into the present day. Now we arrive at a mystery that isn't about a disappearance into the sea or the jungle, but rather a quiet, systematic evacuation so complete it feels like a mass vanishing. This is the story of Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead, one of the world's earliest and most brilliantly planned major cities. Located in modern-day Pakistan, Mohenjo-Daro was the crowning achievement of the Indus Valley civilization, a metropolis that thrived for centuries, home to perhaps 40,000 people at its peak. What you find there is not the haphazard growth of an ancient town, but evidence of a superbly organized society. The city was built on a precise grid system with straight, wide streets, some of which were equipped with the world's first known covered drainage and sewage system, channeling waste away from homes and public wells. The level of urban planning is simply staggering, rivaling anything that would be seen again for thousands of years. And yet, by around 1900 years before the Common Era, this pinnacle of ancient urban living was utterly abandoned. The people didn't just die out, they appear to have packed up and left, leaving behind a ghost city whose silent, empty streets pose one of archaeology's most persistent questions. What could possibly cause a society this advanced to simply walk away from its greatest creation? For a long time, the dominant explanation in history books was a dramatic and violent one, the Aryan invasion hypothesis. This theory, largely based on interpretations of ancient Indian texts like the Rig Veda, suggested that waves of nomadic, horse-riding warriors from Central Asia, known as Aryans, swept down into the subcontinent, conquering the indigenous, dark-skinned people they called the Dasas. According to this narrative, these invaders destroyed the cities of the Indus Valley, including Mohenjo-Daro, and imposed their own culture and language, which eventually evolved into Vedic Sanskrit and the foundations of classical Hindu society. The theory seemed to fit a classic pattern of a more militaristic, nomadic culture overthrowing a settled, perhaps more peaceful, urban one. However, over the past several decades, this hypothesis has come under intense scrutiny and is now widely disputed. The archaeological evidence at Mohenjo-Daro itself does not strongly support a single cataclysmic invasion. There are no vast layers of ash from a city-wide conflagration, no clear evidence of a great battle with heaps of weapons and skeletons of slain defenders scattered in the streets. While some skeletons have been found in what appear to be hurried graves, they are not concentrated in a way that suggests a mass slaughter. Furthermore, the decline of the Indus Valley civilization appears to have been a gradual process taking place over centuries, not a sudden fall from a single military defeat. The Aryan invasion theory is now seen by many scholars as an oversimplification, a colonial-era narrative that may say more about the times in which it was formulated than about the actual events of the distant past. If not a sudden invasion, then what? A more scientifically grounded and widely accepted explanation points to a slow-moving, but ultimately unstoppable, environmental catastrophe, climate change. The lifeblood of the Indus Valley civilization was its rivers, not just the Indus itself, but a network of waterways, including the legendary and now Saraswati River, which is frequently mentioned in the Vedas. Geological and climate data suggest that around the time of Mohenjo-Daro's decline, the monsoon patterns that fed these rivers began to shift dramatically. The rains that had reliably watered the vast agricultural lands that fed the cities began to fail. Over generations, a persistent and severe drought would have set in. The rivers would have shrunk, their courses shifting, leaving ancient port cities high and dry and destroying the agricultural surplus that supported urban populations. This theory paints a picture of a slow, grinding crisis. As harvests failed year after year, the social contract that held the complex civilization together would have frayed. Trade networks would have collapsed as there was nothing left to trade. People would have been forced to abandon the great cities in search of water and arable land, likely dispersing into smaller, more sustainable villages. The civilization didn't so much collapse as it unraveled, its people adapting to a new, harsher reality by returning to a simpler, more rural way of life. The glory of Mohenjo-Daro was not destroyed by an enemy's sword, but quietly suffocated by dust and thirst. Yet, for all the logic of the climate change theory, there is a small, strange, and highly controversial set of clues that has given rise to one of archaeology's most speculative and fascinating ideas. In one area of Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists found a group of skeletons scattered in the streets, as if the people had died suddenly, with no evidence of a proper burial. More curiously, some accounts from the original excavations in the early 20th century mention evidence of extreme heat. There were reports of layers of ash and, most puzzling of all, sections of brick and pottery that had been vitrified, that is, fused together into a glassy slag, a process that requires temperatures well over 1,000 degrees Celsius, far hotter than any ordinary household fire or even a city-wide conflagration could produce. These observations, though not universally accepted by mainstream archaeologists, led a handful of researchers and authors to propose a truly extraordinary theory, that Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed by an ancient nuclear-like explosion. Proponents of this radical idea point to ancient Indian epics like the Mahabharata, which contain descriptions of weapons that sound unnervingly like modern atomic blasts. They speak of a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an iron thunderbolt that was a gigantic messenger of death. The texts describe a brilliant light, smoke, and fire brighter than 1,000 suns, and they mention that after the blast, the survivors would lose their hair and nails, symptoms consistent with radiation poisoning. Could these be distorted memories of a real, advanced technology possessed by a lost civilization? The theory suggests that a war using such devastating weapons could have wiped out Mohenjo-Daro in an instant, vitrifying the stone and leaving the dead unburied where they fell. It is a thrilling, science fiction-like narrative that captures the imagination. However, the mainstream scientific community overwhelmingly rejects this theory. The vitrified stone is more likely explained by a phenomenon known as a clinker, where a massive, long-burning fire, perhaps fueled by a great concentration of organic material and low-quality bricks, can create localized pockets of extreme heat. The skeletons found in the streets could be the result of a later massacre, a pandemic, or simply the final, desperate days of a dying city, not a single catastrophic event. There is no radioactive residue at the site that would be the definitive fingerprint of a nuclear blast. While the ancient texts are indeed vivid, interpreting them as literal accounts of advanced technology is considered a leap too far by most historians, who see them as powerful mythological and poetic allegories. The nuclear theory remains on the very fringes of archaeology, a captivating what-if scenario that, while scientifically unproven, speaks to our enduring fascination with the idea that our ancient past might hold secrets far more advanced and terrifying than we have ever dared to imagine. The true story of Mohenjo-Daro's end is likely a quieter, more tragic tale of a civilization succumbing to the very environmental forces it had so brilliantly managed for centuries. A warning from the past about the fragility of even the most sophisticated societies when the natural world upon which they depend begins to change. While Europe was mired in the religious fervor and political turmoil of the Crusades, a story began to circulate that offered a tantalizing shred of hope, a rumor of a mighty Christian ally waiting in the distant, mysterious lands of the East. This was the legend of Prester John, a figure who would capture the European imagination for centuries. He was described as a priest-king of immense piety and unimaginable wealth, a direct descendant of the biblical Magi, who ruled over a vast and peaceful kingdom brimming with marvels. In this realm, it was said, rivers flowed with gold and gems could be plucked from the earth, but its greatest treasure was its faith, for all its subjects were devout Christians. This myth was not just a fanciful tale, it was a political and religious fantasy born from desperation. For Crusader states struggling against powerful Muslim forces, the idea of a powerful Christian monarch at the head of a massive army, poised to strike the Islamic world from the rear, was a divine promise, a potential turning of the tide in a holy war that was not going well. It was a legend that gave a frightened and fractured Europe something to believe in. The origins of this captivating myth are as shrouded in mystery as the kingdom it described. The story first gained widespread traction in the mid-12th century with the circulation of a letter, allegedly written by Prester John himself and addressed to the Byzantine Emperor and the Holy Roman Emperor. This document, now believed by scholars to have been a clever forgery likely created in a European scriptorium, was a masterpiece of medieval propaganda and imagination. It described a kingdom of staggering splendor, free from poverty and lies, where fantastical creatures like giants and men with horns coexisted with pious Christians. Initially, this kingdom was placed firmly in Asia. This made a certain geographical sense to the medieval European mind. They knew of Christian communities like the Nestorians that had spread along the Silk Road as far as China. The vague reports of a powerful ruler somewhere in the vastness of Central Asia were easily molded into the form of the priest-king they so desperately wanted to exist. As the decades passed and the Mongol Empire rose to prominence, the legend found new life and a potential face. European travelers and diplomats venturing into the Mongol court in the 13th century hoped to find Prester John or at least secure an alliance with these powerful new steppe rulers against their common Muslim foes. It was in this context that they encountered the story of Togrul, a Mongol ruler of the Karates Confederation. The Kerates were known to have significant numbers of Nestorian Christians among them, and Togrul himself was reported in some sources to have been baptized, earning him the title Wang Khan or Ong Khan. Here was a real, powerful Central Asian chieftain with Christian connections, who was eventually defeated and absorbed by his rising nephew, Genghis Khan. To European ears, the story of this Christian king defeated by a pagan rival was easily reinterpreted. They conflated the figures, and Prester John was sometimes identified as this very Wang Khan, a historical figure whose real story was reshaped to fit the pre-existing European myth. The legend was flexible, adapting to new information and attaching itself to whatever promising story emerged from the East. Despite the hopeful expeditions and the persistent rumors, no European explorer ever found the fabled kingdom. The relentless search itself, however, had unintended and profound consequences. As the Mongol Empire made travel across Asia safer for a time, Europeans like Marco Polo ventured further east than ever before. They meticulously documented the lands they passed through, asking after the great Christian king, but they found only fragments, small communities of Nestorian Christians, not a mighty empire. With a door to a Central Asian Prester John seemingly closed, the legend performed a remarkable geographical leap. By the 14th century, as knowledge of the world expanded, the kingdom was increasingly relocated to a place that was still mysterious and largely inaccessible to Europeans, Ethiopia. The existence of the ancient Christian kingdom of Ethiopia in the highlands of East Africa provided a new, perfect vessel for the myth. It was an isolated, powerful Christian state surrounded by non-Christian lands, matching the core description of Prester John's domain. For the next 200 years, Portuguese explorers sailing around Africa would seek the kingdom of Prester John in the Ethiopian highlands. And while they did find a real and fascinating Christian civilization, it was not the land of limitless wealth and fantasy they had dreamed of. The enduring power of the Prester John legend lies not in its failure, but in what it reveals about the medieval European worldview. It was a fantasy born from a profound ignorance of world geography and a deep-seated need to believe that they were not alone in their faith. The myth served as a powerful motivator for exploration, pushing the boundaries of the known world as questers sought this elusive ally. It demonstrates how hope can shape perception, turning vague reports and misunderstood histories into a compelling narrative that drives human ambition. The kingdom was never found because it never existed in the form it was imagined. It was a mirror reflecting Europe's own fears, hopes, and aspirations back at itself. A phantom kingdom that guided explorers across continents and centuries, proving that sometimes the most powerful forces in history are not the empires that exist, but the legends we create about those we wish were there. Deep within the steamy jungles of northern Cambodia, far from the well-trodden paths leading to the world-famous Angkor Wat, lies another, more enigmatic wonder of the Khmer Empire. This is Koh Ker, a city that experienced a meteoric rise to become the imperial capital, only to be abandoned just a few decades later, its grand monuments left to the relentless embrace of the forest. For a brief but brilliant 23-year period in the 10th century, from around 928 to 941 of the Common Era, Koh Ker was the center of the Khmer universe. The man behind this dramatic shift was King Jayavarman IV, a powerful and ambitious ruler who, for reasons still debated, decided to turn his back on the established capital in the Angkor region and establish a Chinese letter brand new power center 100 kilometers to the northeast. In this short window, he orchestrated one of history's most intense bursts of temple construction, transforming a remote area into a sprawling metropolis of stunning scale and artistry, only for it to be unceremoniously deserted by his successor, leaving behind a ghost city of profound architectural marvels and a mystery that has puzzled scholars for centuries. The most immediate and breathtaking question is how such a monumental building program was accomplished in such a condensed time frame. The sheer output at Koh Ker is staggering. Archaeologists have identified the remains of close to 100 temples and sanctuaries within a 20-square-mile area. The centerpiece and the structure that defines Koh Ker's skyline is Prasat Tom, a colossal 7-tiered pyramid rising dramatically 36 meters above the flat jungle floor. This is not a pyramid in the Egyptian sense, but a symbolic representation of Mount Meru, the home of the gods in Hindu cosmology. Its sheer, almost vertical faces and imposing height give it a distinctly different character from the more sprawling, horizontal temples of Angkor. Beyond this giant, the landscape is dotted with dozens of other major shrines, along with an extensive infrastructure of reservoirs known as barrays and a complex network of roads and canals. The logistics of this endeavor are mind-boggling. Quarrying, transporting, and carving the millions of tons of sandstone required an immense, highly organized workforce, likely numbering in the tens of thousands, all mobilized and directed with incredible efficiency. This wasn't a gradual, generational project. It was a single, explosive act of royal will, a statement of power carved into the landscape at a breathtaking pace that still defies belief. So, why would a king go to such extraordinary effort and expense to build a new capital from scratch, only for his own son to abandon it so soon after his death? One of the most persistent theories points to a simple yet catastrophic failure of infrastructure, a broken water system. The lifeblood of any Khmer city was water. The sophisticated management of monsoon rains through vast reservoirs and intricate canals was essential for supporting a large urban population, for agriculture, and for ritual purposes. Koh Ker's location was strategically chosen near a natural hill, but it was also inherently problematic. The city's main reservoir, the Rahul Barray, is relatively small and shallow compared to the massive reservoirs at Angkor, such as the West Barray. Geological studies suggest that the local soil and rock formations may have been ill-suited to holding water effectively. It is possible that the reservoir system at Koh Ker simply could not retain enough water to sustain the city through the long, dry season. A series of droughts or a critical failure in the hydraulic engineering, a breached dam or a leaking reservoir could have created an existential crisis, forcing the population to leave in search of a more reliable water source. In this scenario, the grand capital was not so much abandoned as it was rendered uninhabitable by an environmental miscalculation. However, the water theory doesn't fully satisfy everyone, leading historians to explore more human-centered explanations rooted in political intrigue and dynastic ambition. King Jayavarman IV was a usurper, not a direct heir from the main royal line centered at Angkor. His move to Koh Ker can be seen as a powerful act of political separation, a deliberate strategy to establish his own independent power base, free from the influential priestly families and entrenched aristocracy of the old capital. Koh Ker was his personal project, a physical manifestation of his unique authority, likely funded by his control over lucrative trade routes and resource extraction in the northern part of the empire. His reign was marked by a distinct artistic style, with sculptures that are more robust and dynamic than those from the Angkor period. When he died, his son and successor, King Harshavarman II, faced a difficult choice. He could continue his father's legacy in this remote, expensive capital, or he could return to the historical and spiritual heartland of the empire at Angkor, where the legitimacy of kingship was deeply rooted. The decision to return to Angkor may have been a pragmatic political reconciliation, an attempt to heal the schism his father had created and reunite the empire under the banner of the traditional capital. Koh Ker was therefore not a failure, but a temporary power center, a royal experiment that served its purpose for one reign and was then intentionally left behind, its temples becoming grand, isolated memorials to a single king's towering ambition. Another layer to the mystery involves the sheer number of unfinished structures and the peculiar evidence found at the site. Many of the smaller temples at Koh Ker appear to be only partly completed, as if the workers simply dropped their tools and left when the royal court departed. Furthermore, excavations have uncovered very little evidence of a substantial, long-term residential population surrounding the grand religious structures. While there was certainly a city there, it may have been primarily populated by priests, artisans, and laborers directly serving the king's project, rather than a thriving, self-sustaining urban center with a diverse economy. This supports the idea that Koh Ker was always something of a company town, its existence entirely dependent on the presence and patronage of the king. When the royal patronage vanished, the primary reason for the city's existence vanished with it. The temples, imbued with divine significance, were likely still visited and maintained for a time by a small caretaker priesthood. But the political and economic engine that drove the city's explosive growth had already moved on, leaving the jungle to slowly reclaim its silent stone monuments. Today, Koh Ker stands as a place of eerie grandeur and haunting beauty. The main pyramid, Prasat Tom, remains a challenging climb, but the view from the top over the unbroken canopy is a powerful reward, offering a sense of the scale and isolation of this lost capital. The site feels vastly different from Angkor. It is wilder, less restored, and more evocative of the mystery that surrounds it. Unexploded ordnance from past conflicts still litter some areas, a grim reminder of more recent history that, like the ancient water shortages, continues to limit exploration. The enigma of Koh Ker is not a single question, but a complex tapestry of environmental challenge, political maneuvering, and personal ambition. It forces us to consider the immense power a single ruler could wield in the ancient world, capable of redirecting the entire focus of an empire to a remote jungle outpost for a generation. Yet, it also highlights the fragility of such grand projects, showing how quickly the tides of politics and environment can turn, leaving even the most impressive monuments as silent witnesses to a forgotten king's dream, a magnificent and lonely echo of an empire's brief, dramatic, and unexplained departure from its own center. But our journey does not end with the enigmatic pyramids of China or the lost capitals of the Khmer. It leads us next to a very different kind of monument, one that rides across the landscape in a form both ancient and universally powerful. In the rolling hills of the northeastern Indian state of Manipur lies a sprawling, silent earthwork that defies easy explanation. This is the Great Serpent Mound of Manipur, a massive prehistoric effigy shaped like a gigantic coiled serpent. Stretching for nearly 100 meters across the ground, its sinuous body, defined by raised embankments of earth and stone, forms a series of elegant coils culminating in a distinct pointed head. Unlike the towering temples and fortified cities we have encountered, this is an earthwork, a geoglyph created by moving and shaping the very soil of the hill itself. It is a work of art on a colossal scale, intended not to be entered or lived in, but to be seen, perhaps from above, as a symbol imbued with profound meaning. The most arresting fact about this incredible structure is that we know absolutely nothing about the people who built it. They left no written records, no associated settlements, no pottery shards or tools that can be definitively linked to its construction. The mound exists in a historical vacuum, a solitary masterpiece from a forgotten culture, its silent form posing a riddle that has endured for centuries, if not millennia. The central mystery, of course, is its purpose. Why would a prehistoric society invest what must have been an immense communal effort to sculpt a giant snake into the hillside? Scholars have put forward several compelling theories, each pointing to a different facet of ancient human understanding. One of the most prominent ideas is that the mound served a precise astronomical function. Many ancient cultures around the world aligned their monuments with celestial events, the rising of the sun on the solstices or the path of certain stars. It is possible that the orientation of the serpent's coils, or the direction its head is pointing, aligns with a specific solar or lunar event, marking it as a giant calendar carved into the earth. This would have been a vital tool for an agricultural society, helping to determine the optimal times for planting and harvest, and transforming the serpent into a cosmic guide, a link between the cycles of the earth and the movements of the heavens. A second, and perhaps more intuitive, theory is that the mound was a site of deep religious or ritual significance. The serpent is one of the most widespread and potent symbols in human mythology, found in cultures across the globe. It often represents a duality of forces, both creation and destruction, healing and poison, the earthly underworld and the cycle of rebirth. The serpent effigy could have been a focal point for rituals aimed at ensuring fertility for the land, appeasing powerful chthonic deities, or serving as a sacred portal for communicating with the spirit world. The act of building the mound itself might have been a form of worship, a communal ceremony that reinforced social bonds while creating a permanent home for a divine or ancestral presence in the landscape. Alternatively, the mound could have functioned as a territorial marker, a visible and awe-inspiring declaration of a tribe's claim to the land, its imposing size serving as a warning to rivals and a symbol of identity for its builders. The serpent, as a symbol of power and protection, would be a natural choice for such a statement. The location of the mound in Manipur adds another rich layer to its interpretation, deeply intertwining it with the living cultural traditions of the region. Manipur is the heartland of the Naga people, a group of diverse tribes known for their vibrant culture and their deep connection to the land. In Naga mythology, serpents hold a place of immense importance. They feature prominently in creation stories, often seen as guardians of the earth, masters of water sources, and powerful spiritual entities. Many Naga folk tales speak of immense pythons or mythical serpents that shaped the geography of the land or bestowed blessings upon the people. The Great Serpent Mound, while far older than the current oral traditions, sits perfectly within this cultural context. It is entirely possible that the Naga people's own rich mythology of serpent worship is in fact a distant echo of the very beliefs that motivated the mound's construction thousands of years earlier. The monument may not be forgotten at all, but rather its original meaning has been transformed and carried forward through story and legend. Its physical form a constant reminder of a spiritual relationship with the natural world that stretches back into an unimaginable past. This connection invites us to look even further afield, to see the Manipur serpent not as an isolated phenomenon, but as part of a vast pan-Asian tapestry of serpent veneration. From the Naga deities of Indian and Southeast Asian Buddhism and Hinduism, often depicted as benevolent protectors of the Buddha's teachings, to the dragon kings of Chinese and Japanese lore who control the rains and rivers, the serpent has been a central figure in Asian spirituality for millennia. The presence of this giant effigy in Manipur suggests that this region may have been a particularly potent center for this form of worship, a place where the abstract concept of the sacred serpent was made physically manifest on a grand scale. The mound could represent a point of cultural convergence, a place where ancient ideas and beliefs flowing along trade routes or through migrations crystallized into one of the most striking examples of landscape art in the ancient world. Its coils seem to gather not just earth, but the threads of mythologies from across the continent, weaving them into a single, enduring form. Without a time machine or a sudden, miraculous archaeological discovery, the true purpose of the Great Serpent Mound may forever remain just out of reach, its builders and their intentions hidden behind the veil of centuries. Yet its power is undiminished. It stands as a testament to the universal human urge to imprint meaning onto the land, to create symbols that transcend generations, and to honor the mysteries of the world through acts of collective imagination and awe. Yet another empire that once commanded the seas would ultimately find its power seeping away into the sands of time. not through a single cataclysm, but through a slow, inexorable process of erosion. This is the story of the Kingdom of Champa, a civilization that flourished for over 1,000 years along the central and southern coasts of what is now Vietnam. The Cham people were not a minor footnote in history. They were a formidable maritime power, a vibrant hub in the vast network of Asian trade, and a culture with a profound artistic and spiritual legacy. Their temples, known as Kalan, rose towards the heavens, dedicated to Hindu deities like Shiva, while their sophisticated Sanskrit-based script recorded the glories of their kings on intricately carved stelae. For centuries, their ships dominated the routes between China, the Indonesian archipelago, and India, making them wealthy and influential. The central mystery of Champa is not one of a sudden, dramatic collapse, but something far more complex and haunting. How does a powerful, resilient kingdom, after enduring for a millennium, simply fade from the map, its people gradually absorbed and its unique cultural voice slowly muted until it becomes a whisper in the modern national story of Vietnam? To understand the decline, we must first appreciate the unique and precarious geography that shaped Champa's destiny. Unlike the vast, agriculturally rich river deltas that supported centralized empires, Champa was a string of river valleys separated by rugged mountains and rocky promontories. This geography fostered a decentralized political structure, often described as a mandala of competing city-states like Indrapura, Vijaya, and Panjuranga. Each of these centers had its own ruler and its own access to the sea, and while they shared a common culture and language, they were also prone to rivalry and internal conflict. This lack of a single, unified political heart made Champa inherently vulnerable. When external pressure mounted, it was difficult for the Cham realms to present a united front, as one city-state might ally with an invader against a rival neighbor. This internal fragmentation was a critical weakness, a crack in the foundation that would be exploited time and again throughout their long history, preventing the kind of consolidated, enduring statehood achieved by their neighbors in Dai Viet to the north. The most persistent and devastating external force was without doubt the southward expansion of the Vietnamese people, known as the Nam Ti letter 1 BFN, or March to the South. For centuries, the Dai Viet, based in the Red River Delta, were contained by the powerful Chinese Empire to their north. But after securing their independence in the 10th century, their own population pressures and dynastic ambitions turned their gaze southward toward the fertile coastal plains held by the Cham. What followed was not a single war, but a relentless, centuries-long campaign of attrition. The Cham scored significant victories, at times even sacking the Vietnamese capital, but they could not sustain the long-term demographic pressure. The Vietnamese approach was systematic. Following a military victory, they would establish military colonies, assimilate the land into their own agricultural system, and slowly but surely Sinicize the territory. The old Cham citadel of Vijaya, for instance, after a decisive defeat in the 15th century, was systematically dismantled, its people displaced, and the area resettled by Vietnamese farmers. This was not merely a change of rulers, it was a fundamental transformation of the land itself, squeezing the Cham people into an ever-shrinking territorial foothold in the southernmost region of Panjuranga. Compounding this relentless territorial pressure was a profound shift in the economic currents that had once been Champa's lifeblood. For most of its history, the kingdom's wealth was derived from its mastery of the sea. Cham ports were vital way stations in the spice trade, and their merchants were renowned for their exotic goods, including the prized eaglewood, a fragrant agarwood highly valued across Asia. However, from around the 13th century onward, the patterns of global trade began to change. The rise of new maritime powers and the shifting preferences of the Chinese market meant that the specific trade routes that had enriched Champa became less central. Furthermore, as the Vietnamese moved south, they not only took the land but also began to exert control over the remaining coastal trade, gradually marginalizing Cham merchants. The kingdom's economic foundation, so dependent on its role as a middleman, began to crumble, depriving it of the resources needed to fund armies, build temples, and maintain the complex hydraulic systems that supported its agriculture. A kingdom built on water was slowly being left high and dry by the changing tides of commerce. The final act of Champa's political disappearance was a confluence of these pressures, culminating in a painful absorption. By the 17th century, the once vast kingdom had been reduced to a small principality around Panjuranga, which existed as a sort of vassal state under the protection and then the direct control of the Nguyen lords of southern Vietnam. The last vestiges of Cham political autonomy were formally extinguished in the early 19th century when the Nguyen emperor Minh Mang fully annexed the territory and implemented a forceful policy of assimilation, attempting to erase Cham cultural identity and integrate them completely into the Vietnamese state. This official dissolution, however, did not mean the Cham people vanished. Instead, their story enters its most poignant phase, the gradual fading of a distinct cultural footprint. The Sanskrit-based script, once used for royal proclamations and religious texts, fell into disuse, replaced by Vietnamese and later French colonial administration. Their unique matrilineal customs and Hindu-Buddhist animist faith complex came under sustained pressure from both Vietnamese Confucianism and, significantly, from the spread of Islam. This introduction of Islam presents a fascinating and often overlooked dimension of the Cham story. Starting around the 15th century, Muslim traders and missionaries from the Malay world and beyond began to establish a presence in the remaining Cham communities. For many Cham, converting to Islam became a way to forge new trade alliances and, crucially, to establish a distinct identity separate from their Vietnamese Confucian overlords and neighbors. Today, the two main surviving Cham communities in Vietnam reflect this split: the Cham Bani, who practice a localized, syncretic form of Islam, and the Cham Balaman, who have preserved elements of their traditional Hinduism. This religious diversification, while a testament to their cultural resilience, also meant that the old, unifying cultural core of the classical Champa kingdom was irrevocably altered. The mystery of Champa's fate, therefore, is answered not with a bang but with a slow, multifaceted dissolution. It was death by 1,000 cuts, territorial loss, economic irrelevance, internal division, and cultural assimilation. A poignant reminder that the fall of civilizations is not always a dramatic explosion, but can be a quiet, heartbreaking fading away, leaving behind the breathtaking temple ruins of Mai Son and Po Naga as silent, beautiful monuments to a world that once was. If you were to walk through the modern city of Jeonju in South Korea today, you might not immediately grasp that you are strolling across the ancient heartland of one of history's most long-lived and sophisticated kingdoms. For nearly a millennium, this was the capital of the Silla Kingdom, a dynasty that unified the Korean peninsula and fostered a golden age of art, science, and culture. The landscape itself is a vast, open-air museum, dotted with hundreds of grassy mounds that look like gentle, sleeping hills. But these are no ordinary hills. They are the tumuli, the magnificent burial tombs of Silla's kings and aristocracy, silent guardians of a glorious past. Amidst this necropolis of kings stands a singular, bottle-shaped stone tower that seems almost modest in its proportions, yet it represents one of the most enduring scientific mysteries of ancient Asia, the Cheomseongdi Observatory. Erected in the 7th century of the Common Era during the reign of Queen Seondeok, it is one of the oldest surviving dedicated astronomical observatories anywhere in the world. Its very existence is a declaration that the Silla people were not just warriors and artists, but also meticulous watchers of the heavens. The enigma, however, is not merely its age, but the precise nature of its function and the full extent of the cosmic knowledge it was built to uncover. At first glance, Cheomseongdi appears elegantly simple. It stands about 9 meters tall, constructed from 365 pieces of cut granite, a number that immediately suggests a connection to the solar calendar. The structure is a cylindrical tower gently tapering towards the top with a single square window facing south. It rests on a square base made of 12 large stones, which some scholars interpret as representing the 12 months of the year or the 12 traditional earthly branches. The arrangement is profoundly mathematical and symbolic, but the exact methodology of its use has been lost to time. How did the Silla astronomers actually use this tower? The most straightforward theory is that it served as a kind of meridian line instrument. An observer inside the tower could have used the south-facing window to track the passage of specific stars across the local meridian, the imaginary north-south line in the sky, allowing them to determine the exact time of night and the precise dates of the solstices and equinoxes. This was not just abstract knowledge, it was critical for administering the kingdom. An accurate calendar was essential for agriculture, for scheduling imperial rituals and tax collections, and for legitimizing the rule of the monarch, who was often seen as a link between the celestial and terrestrial realms. The observatory was, in this sense, a tool of statecraft as much as a tool of science. Yet, the mystery of Silla astronomy does not begin and end with Cheomseongdi. Many researchers believe the true genius of their celestial understanding is revealed when we look at the broader landscape of Jeonju itself. The city was laid out according to precise geomatic principles, a practice known as pungsu, the Korean counterpart to Chinese feng shui, which sought to harmonize human structures with the natural energy flows of the earth and sky. There is a compelling and controversial theory that the major tombs and monuments of Jeonju were not placed randomly, but were deliberately aligned to mirror specific constellations. For instance, the placement of the 5 major tombs in the central district, the so-called 5 Great Tombs, has been analyzed by some to see if they correspond to the 5 stars of the Big Dipper, an asterism that held immense significance in East Asian astrology as the chariot of the celestial emperor. Another fascinating site is the Chunmachong tomb, the Heavenly Horse tomb, famous for the exquisite painting of a flying horse found within. The orientation of its burial chamber and the artifacts placed alongside the deceased king suggest a profound desire to facilitate the soul's journey to the stars, directly linking earthly royalty with celestial destiny. The debate among historians and archaeologists hinges on whether these alignments are deliberate masterpieces of urban planning or simply beautiful coincidences. Skeptics argue that without explicit written records or more precise archaeological evidence, it is difficult to prove intentionality. The Silla people left no detailed stargazing manuals or engineering blueprints for Cheomseongdi. The patterns we see today could be the result of later urban development or our own modern tendency to find patterns in ancient layouts. Proponents of the astronomical alignment theory, however, point to the sheer consistency of the evidence. They note that the Silla kingdom was a contemporary of Tang Dynasty China, a period of intense cultural and scientific exchange. Korean scholars traveled to China and brought back advanced astronomical texts and techniques. It is entirely plausible that the Silla court, in its ambition to build a perfect capital, would have integrated this cosmic knowledge into the very bones of their city, creating a terrestrial reflection of the heavenly order they so revered. The tombs were not just graves, they were permanent monuments anchoring the power of the dynasty to the eternal, unchanging patterns of the cosmos. Ultimately, the silent stones of Cheomseongdi and the majestic tombs of Jeonju challenge us to expand our definition of an ancient observatory. We tend to imagine such places as filled with complex brass instruments, but for the Silla people, the entire world was an instrument for understanding the universe. The tower itself was likely just one component in a much larger system of observation that included horizon markers, shadow poles, and perhaps even reflections in pools of water. The true observatory was the entire sacred city, a vast cosmological machine built from earth and stone. The mystery persists because the knowledge was so deeply embedded in the culture that it may never have needed to be written down in a single, comprehensive text. It was lived, breathed, and built into the landscape. Every time the Queen's astronomers climbed inside Cheomseongdi to mark the rising of a specific star, they were participating in a ritual that connected the rhythm of their kingdom to the grand celestial dance above, leaving behind a legacy that we can still see, but whose deepest rhythms we are only just beginning to hear. But our journey now turns from the cosmic observations of kingdoms to the fragile, written words that connected cultures across continents, bringing us to one of the greatest troves of lost knowledge in human history. Imagine the Silk Road not just as a route for silk and spices, but as a highway for ideas, a sprawling network where religions, philosophies, and scientific concepts flowed as freely as any material good. In the vast, arid landscapes of western China, near the oasis town of Dunhuang, a system of hundreds of caves was carved into a cliff face, creating a complex known as the Mogao Caves, or the Caves of 1,000 Buddhas. For centuries, this was a vibrant spiritual and intellectual crossroads, where Buddhist monks, merchants, and pilgrims from across Asia would stop, pray, and contribute to a stunning collection of art and scripture. And then, around the beginning of the second millennium, one of these caves, Cave 17, was sealed shut, its entrance hidden behind a wall and forgotten. It remained that way, a silent time capsule, for nearly 900 years, until a Taoist monk named Wang Yuanlu, who had appointed himself the cave's caretaker, was clearing sand from a corridor in 1900 when a section of the wall gave way, revealing a small, dark chamber stacked from floor to ceiling with an unimaginable treasure. This was not a treasure of gold, but of paper and silk, a hoard of approximately 50,000 manuscripts, scrolls, and paintings, a discovery that would fundamentally reshape our understanding of the ancient world. The contents of this library, now known as the Dunhuang manuscripts, were a scholar's dream and a historian's revelation. They were not the product of a single culture, but a breathtakingly diverse archive that reflected the true multicultural nature of the Silk Road. The languages alone were a testament to this diversity, with texts written not only in Chinese and Tibetan, but also in Sogdian, Uyghur, Sanskrit, and even Hebrew. The subjects covered were equally vast, ranging from profound Buddhist sutras and philosophical treatises to mundane contracts, household accounts, and popular folk songs. There were Nestorian Christian prayers, Zoroastrian rituals, and Manichaean hymns, all preserved side by side in the dry desert air. This was not a curated, official state library. It was a snapshot of life and belief, a random collection that had accumulated over centuries, possibly sealed for safekeeping against a looming threat, such as an invasion by a hostile power. The discovery provided a raw, unfiltered view into the daily concerns, spiritual longings, and intellectual exchanges of the people who traveled and lived along the world's most famous trade route, offering insights that no official history book could ever hope to capture. Yet, for all its monumental importance, the story of the Dunhuang Library is also tinged with a deep sense of loss and controversy. Word of the discovery quickly reached Western explorers, most notably the Hungarian-British archaeologist Aurel Stein, who arrived in 1907. Stein, a shrewd and persistent scholar, managed to win Wang Yuanlu's trust, and for a relatively small donation to Wang's restoration fund, secured thousands of the finest manuscripts and painted banners, which he shipped back to the British Museum. Soon after, French sinologist Paul Pelliot followed, selecting thousands more of the most historically significant texts for the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. While these actions preserved the manuscripts from the neglect and potential destruction they might have faced locally, they are now widely seen as a form of cultural pillaging, the removal of a priceless national heritage under questionable circumstances. The scattering of the collection across institutions in London, Paris, Beijing, and St. Petersburg has made comprehensive study a logistical challenge for generations, a permanent fracture in a collection that was meant to be whole. This history of discovery and dispersal leads directly to the tantalizing central mystery that continues to captivate researchers today. The Dunhuang Library was found in a single, relatively small cave. The Mogao complex, however, boasts over 750 caves. Could Cave 17 truly be the only one that served as a repository? Many scholars and explorers believe it is almost statistically impossible. The prevailing theory is that Cave 17 was merely one of several such hidden libraries, a temporary safe room used during a moment of crisis. The sheer scale of intellectual activity at Dunhuang over so many centuries suggests that other, perhaps even larger, collections of manuscripts could have been sealed away in other, still undiscovered chambers within the vast honeycomb of caves. The cliff face is immense, and erosion or deliberate camouflage could have concealed other entrances just as effectively. Expeditions have used ground-penetrating radar and other technologies to search for voids and anomalies in the rock, but the complex geology and the fragile nature of the site make large-scale investigation difficult and risky. The potential contents of a second lost library are what fuel the imagination. While the first library contained a remarkable diversity of texts, its collection was still, in a way, random. A second library could be far more specialized and profound. It might hold the complete lost canon of Manichaean scriptures, a religion that was once a major rival to Christianity and Buddhism but was brutally suppressed, its texts systematically destroyed. Only fragments survive, and a full library could illuminate this entire lost world. It could contain the missing foundational texts of Central Asian Nestorian Christianity, which spread further east than many realize, potentially even reaching the imperial court of China. There could be astronomical charts mapping stars unknown to the Western world, medical texts describing remedies lost to time, or detailed geographical accounts of lands and peoples that have since vanished from all historical records. The possibility exists that somewhere in the silent, sun-baked cliffs of Dunhuang, or in a similar cave complex along the forgotten branches of the Silk Road, an even greater treasure than the one already found is waiting, holding the answers to questions we have not even yet learned to ask, a silent guardian of the pluralistic, interconnected spirit of the ancient world. And now we turn from the grand, external mysteries of kingdoms and cities to a profound and deeply personal enigma, one that ventures into the most intimate realms of faith, human endurance, and the very boundary between life and death. High in the secluded, mist-shrouded mountains of northern Japan, in the Yamagata prefecture, rests a collection of figures that defy conventional understanding. They are not statues, nor are they typical mummies. They are the Sokushin Butsu, the Buddhas in the body. These are the physical remains of Buddhist monks who, through a staggering act of will and devotion, performed a multi-year ritual of self-mummification while still alive. Their bodies, often seated in the lotus position of meditation, have been preserved for centuries, their skin darkened and taut, yet their forms remarkably intact. They are not seen as deceased, but as living Buddhas in a state of deep, eternal meditation, having achieved a spiritual goal so extreme it challenges our fundamental concepts of mortality. The mystery here is twofold: the profound spiritual conviction that would compel a person to undertake such a journey, and the perplexing scientific puzzle of how their physical bodies could possibly endure in such a state through natural means alone. The path to becoming a Sokushin Butsu was not a sudden decision, but a meticulously planned and grueling spiritual marathon that could last for 1,000 days or even a full decade. It was a practice primarily associated with the Shingon sect of esoteric Buddhism, a tradition that emphasizes the possibility of achieving enlightenment in one's present body. The process began with a radical and brutal transformation of the monk's diet, a phase designed to strip the body of all fat and moisture, the very elements that cause decomposition. For the first 1,000 days, the monk would engage in a punishing regimen of physical labor and meditation, while subsisting on a diet of only nuts, seeds, and water. This was merely the preparation. For the next 1,000 days, the diet became even more severe, restricted to roots, pine bark, and a special toxic tea made from the sap of the oroshi tree, the same lacquer used to coat traditional Japanese bowls. This poisonous tea served a dual, horrifying purpose. It induced vomiting, sweating, and further fluid loss, and its toxic properties seeped into the body, making it an unpalatable and deadly environment for the insects and bacteria that would normally cause a corpse to decay. In the final stage, the monk would enter a small, underground stone chamber barely large enough to sit in, connected to the outside world only by a narrow bamboo air tube. Seated in the lotus position, he would ring a bell each day to signal he was still alive. When the bell finally fell silent, his followers would seal the chamber for another 1,000 days, after which they would open it to see if the mummification had succeeded. Only those whose bodies remained incorrupt were revered as true Sokushin, Batsu. They were enshrined and venerated. Those whose bodies had decomposed were respected for their immense effort but buried with ordinary rites. The spiritual rationale behind this unimaginable act is rooted in a concept known as Shujendo, a mountain-based asceticism, and the core Shingon belief in attaining Buddhahood in this very body, or Sokushin Jabatsu. For these monks, the goal was not death but a transcendence of it. They believed that by conquering the desires and attachments of the physical body, the cravings for food, comfort, and even life itself, they could purify their spirit and achieve enlightenment without going through the cycle of death and rebirth. The Sokushin Batsu was not committing suicide, which is a grave sin in Buddhism. Rather, he was seen as entering a state of deep meditation so profound that it stabilized the body and suspended its decay, a testament to the power of his spiritual concentration. He was making his own body a permanent offering and a vessel for spiritual power, becoming a guardian deity for his local village, a source of miracles, and a living bridge between the human and the divine. His preserved form was the ultimate proof of his spiritual victory, a constant, tangible reminder for the community of the possibility of achieving the highest state of being through unwavering discipline and faith. This act was considered the pinnacle of compassion, as the monk vowed to remain in the world, not in a paradise, to aid all suffering beings. From a modern scientific perspective, the preservation of the Sokushin Batsu presents a fascinating natural puzzle. How could this process, undertaken without any modern chemical embalming, result in such remarkable mummification? The answer lies in the brutal effectiveness of the multi-stage regimen. The years of starvation and specialized diet successfully eliminated nearly all body fat and subcutaneous moisture, creating a desiccated, lean environment where bacteria and fungi, which require moisture to thrive, simply could not survive. The consumption of the oroshi tea was a critical, if horrifying, masterstroke. The toxic compounds in the lacquer, primarily urushiol, slowly poisoned the internal organs, further creating a biocidal environment that was hostile to maggots and microbial life. When the monk was finally sealed in his underground tomb, the conditions were nearly perfect for natural mummification. The stone chamber provided a stable, cool temperature, and the limited airflow allowed for a slow, steady drying process without the rapid decomposition that would occur in the open air. In essence, the monk had spent years turning his own body into a self-preserving artifact, a natural desiccant that resisted the forces of decay through a carefully orchestrated, lifelong process of self-purification. It is a shocking convergence of intense spiritual intention and a grim, practical understanding of human biology. The Japanese government officially banned the practice in the late 19th century, and the Sokushin Batsu we see today are the last of their kind, silent, sacred witnesses to a faith so absolute it could conquer the corruption of the grave, leaving behind an enigma that continues to inspire both reverence and profound wonder. Our final mystery takes us from the mountains of Japan to the sun-baked plains of Sri Lanka, to a vanished masterpiece of stone that represents the pinnacle of ancient artistry. In the ancient city of Anuradhapura, the capital of Sri Lanka for over a millennium, you will find a unique and breathtaking architectural feature at the entrance of its most sacred structures, the moonstone. These are not gems but semi-circular slabs of exquisitely carved stone, set into the ground at the foot of staircases leading up to Buddhist temples and monastic libraries. Imagine a half-moon of pale, polished granite about a meter across, its entire surface covered in a series of concentric bands, each one telling a profound spiritual story. The outermost ring almost always features a carving of flickering flames, representing the burning desires and suffering of the material world. Moving inward, you then pass through bands of 4 animals: the elephant, the horse, the lion, and the bull, symbolizing the 4 stages of life: birth, decay, disease, and death. Next comes a lush, intricate vine of lotus flowers, embodying the purity that rises from the mud of earthly existence. And finally, at the very center of this stone universe, lies the culmination of the journey, a simple, unadorned lotus bud, representing the ultimate goal of nirvana, the state of perfect enlightenment and liberation from all suffering. To step onto a moonstone was to symbolically leave the profane world behind and begin an ascent into a sacred space, a physical and spiritual transition carved with unbelievable skill and intention. The sheer number of these moonstones found throughout Anuradhapura points to a sophisticated and deeply symbolic architectural tradition. Yet among all these surviving examples, a tantalizing legend persists among art historians and archaeologists. The story speaks of an original moonstone, a prototype of such unparalleled beauty and complexity that it surpassed all others. It is described as the first of its kind, the masterpiece from which all later moonstones were derived, a creation of such exquisite detail that it was considered the ultimate expression of this art form. According to this legend, this moonstone was the model, the standard against which all others were measured, commissioned for a particularly significant and now lost structure by a powerful monarch. The mystery is that this fabled original, this Genesis stone, has itself completely vanished from history. While we have many beautiful and elaborate moonstones, like the famous one at the Abhayagiri monastery, none are crowned with the title of being the definitive prototype. Its fate, its location, and even the identity of the temple it once graced are all completely unknown, leaving a ghostly absence at the very heart of this remarkable tradition. The search for this lost masterpiece is complicated by the vastness of the Anuradhapura archaeological site and the city's long and turbulent history. Anuradhapura was a massive metropolis, one of the largest and most sophisticated of the ancient world, and it was abandoned as the capital in the 10th century after centuries of intermittent invasion and internal conflict. The jungle reclaimed its grand dagobas, palaces, and monasteries for nearly 1,000 years. This means that countless structures remain unexcavated, buried under layers of earth and vegetation. The original moonstone could be lying just a few feet below the surface in an unexplored quadrant of the city, waiting for a surveyor's tool to strike its carved surface. Alternatively, its disappearance could be the result of deliberate human action. Perhaps it was carefully removed and hidden by monks to protect it from an invading army, secreted away in a location so clever that its secret died with them. Or, in a more sorrowful scenario, the stone may have been shattered, its pieces repurposed as building material for later structures, its divine geometry broken and scattered, its artistic unity lost forever. What makes the potential discovery of this original moonstone so significant is the profound cultural and artistic knowledge it could unlock. As the prototype, it would represent the pure, unadulterated vision of the master artisan who conceived this entire symbolic language in stone. Studying it could reveal the specific theological and philosophical influences that were current at the Sinhalese court at the time of its creation. Was its design influenced by earlier Indian motifs, or did it represent a uniquely Sinhalese innovation that was then exported back to the mainland? The precise style of its carvings, the depth of its relief, and any unique elements not found on later copies could help art historians create a definitive chronology for the development of this art form, allowing them to accurately date other moonstones and the structures they adorn. It would be like finding the original master key to an entire school of art, providing a fixed point from which to understand centuries of artistic evolution and religious expression. Yet, the enduring power of this mystery extends beyond academic circles. For many in Sri Lanka, the ancient moonstones are not merely historical artifacts. They are active symbols of a living spiritual and cultural heritage. The legend of a lost, perfect original resonates on a deeper level. It embodies the human yearning for a golden age, for a time of unsurpassed artistic and spiritual purity that somehow slipped away. The vanished moonstone becomes a metaphor for a lost ideal, a perfection that we know must have existed but remains just beyond our reach. Its unknown fate invites us to imagine, to wonder, and to hope that such beauty might still exist intact, hidden in the earth, preserving its silent, sacred message for a future generation to uncover. In this way, the quest for the stone is as much a philosophical journey as an archaeological one. A search not just for a missing piece of rock, but for the very source of an inspiration that shaped a civilization's approach to the divine, leaving us to ponder if the greatest treasures are those we can still only imagine. And so our journey across a continent of secrets comes to a close for now. From the misty peaks of a hidden Himalayan paradise to the silent, sunken temples off the coast of India, and from the colossal terracotta army standing guard over an unopened tomb to the self-mummified monks meditating for eternity in the mountains of Japan, we have traversed a landscape rich with unanswered questions. These 25 mysteries are far more than historical footnotes. They are vibrant, breathing invitations to wonder, representing the vast, sprawling narrative of human experience in Asia that remains just beyond our grasp. They speak of incredible human ingenuity, like the Lapita people conquering the world's greatest ocean, and of profound spiritual devotion, as seen in the cliffside hanging coffins of the Philippines. They present us with the silent challenge of undeciphered scripts from the Indus Valley, and with the political intrigue behind abandoned capitals like Koh Ker. Each enigma, whether a lost treasure like Yamashita's gold or a forgotten kingdom like Srivijaya, underscores a simple, humbling truth. For all our advanced technology and accumulated knowledge, the past holds vast territories that are still, and may forever be, terra incognita. What makes these puzzles so endlessly captivating is not just the potential for a single, definitive answer, but the way they illuminate the very process of history itself. They remind us that history is not a neat, settled story in a textbook, but a dynamic field of discovery, debate, and sometimes delightful confusion. The Faded Kingdom of Ngonyong shows us how political narratives can be rewritten by successors, while the legend of Prester John reveals how hope and imagination can shape exploration for centuries. The ongoing debate over the origins of powerful figures like the Red Queen of Palenque demonstrates how a single discovery can challenge our assumptions and open up thrilling new possibilities for global connection. These mysteries force us to be comfortable with uncertainty and to appreciate that the human past is a mosaic with many pieces still missing, waiting in the soil, the sea, or the sands for the patient hand of a future discoverer. They are a testament to the limits of our knowledge and an inspiration for the next generation of archaeologists, linguists, and adventurers. Ultimately, these stories connect us to the profound and universal human impulses that transcend time and culture, the drive to build, to explore, to believe, and to leave a mark that outlasts our own brief lives. The Great Wall of Gorgon was a desperate attempt to secure an empire, while the Serpent Mound of Manipur was likely a spiritual gesture to the cosmos. The Astronomical Observatory of Cheomseongdi was a tool to harmonize a kingdom with the heavens, and the Library Cave of Dunhuang was an effort to preserve a world of ideas against the encroaching darkness. Each mystery, in its own way, is a conversation across the centuries, a whisper from our ancestors about what they valued, what they feared, and what they dreamed of achieving. They remind us that the people of the past were as complex, ambitious, and curious as we are, and that their unfinished stories are now our shared inheritance. The adventure does not have to end here. History is a collective endeavor, and new perspectives can often shine a light on old problems. We would love to hear which of these 25 mysteries captured your imagination the most. Was it the vanished fleet of Zheng He that left you pondering the roads not taken? Or does the uncracked code of the Indus Valley Script fire up your inner detective? Perhaps you have a theory about the true location of Shangri-La, or know of another incredible Asian enigma we didn't cover. Share your thoughts, your favorite mysteries, and your own theories in the comments below. Let's continue this exploration together. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the unknown, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the world's greatest enigmas. There are always more secrets waiting to be uncovered, and we look forward